Hello everyone, before the starting of the video I would like to request you all to like and subscribe. That's it, thank you and enjoy. Routine. Chapter 19. Routine. The next few days passed by in a blur, falling into a slow rhythm of the same actions repeated over and over again after he found no progress with his aspect legacy. Hugo waking up early in the morning and having breakfast in the cafeteria with Sunless and the blonde blind girl, whom Hugo had learned was named Cassia. They never talked to each other, simply eating in silence without ever bothering to familiarize themselves with each other. Hugo had really tried, but Sunless and Cassia just seemed too distant for him to reach. Not that he was too interested in making friends with them, the only thing that changed was the way Sunless looked at him, which slowly shifted from caution to downright distrust. Hugo did not know the reason for this, but he didn't try to talk to Sunny about it, deciding to respect his freedom of choice. Lol. After breakfast, the training segments would begin, and they were what Hugo was pouring most of his time and focus into. As it turned out, trying to create a good fighting style for both when he's transformed and when he's not, all within 3 weeks, is not easy. After the training sessions ended came the runic sorcery classes. Hugo had found himself alone in that class almost all the time because Moon, Luna, and Nero only came to class on rare few occasions. When he asked Miss J why this was the case, she explained to him that as Awakens receiving free tutelage under the Academy, they had certain duties to uphold in the Dream Realm section where the government strongholds resided. This was because the Awakened Academy fell under the government's domain, which was interesting information for Hugo. The basics of runic sorcery were a bit strange for Hugo. They were not like the sorcery presented in the webtoons and shows he used to watch, but instead had very different fundamentals that Hugo found to be a bit confusing when not transformed into a Galvan. Runic sorcery is quite different from how crafting-based aspects works, you know. Aspects in their nature are bizarre and convoluted as they an expression of an awakened true self, thus their abilities are all diverse and unique. But that is quite different when it comes to runic sorcery, Miss J said, her voice steady as she pointed to a board filled with runic drawings. Hugo sat in the first rows, utterly alone, noting everything she had said carefully for later usage. You see, two fundamental component of runic sorcery are soul essence and runic language. The reason it isn't used by a lot of awakened is because of its second component, runic language. Hugo tilted his head in confusion. Isn't runic language translated by the spell automatically? Shouldn't that make runic language extremely easy for all awakened? Miss J shook her head. No, it's not quite that simple, Hugo. While yes, the spell makes an awakened comprehend the runes found in the dream realm and even the runes it uses for its own descriptions, it doesn't translate them. Rather, it forces their meaning onto an awakened's mind, giving them the illusion of being translated. And its translation can be vague and misleading a lot of the times due to the fact that runes aren't like our world's language, as one word in the runic language can represent many concepts at the same time. For example, a rune for change can be synonymous with both ruin and destruction. That is why people who are interested in learning runic language spend their lives looking for scriptures of the ancient dream realm, slowly expanding their vocabulary by learning more words. Hugo noted all of these details. Even though they themselves weren't the key to how runic sorcery worked, they were a part of its components, and quite frankly, Hugo was really curious about topics regarding the dream realm. So you might ask, how does runic language come into the grand equation? Well, to put it in the simplest way possible, runic sorcery requires someone to be knowledgeable about runic language. Then, said person would create something called a runic circle. This circle is composed of various runes representing the drawer's desired outcome. Let's say there's a sword you want to enchant, you draw a rune upon it and then said rune would have to contain multiple runic words that make up the enchantment. She noted parts of the diagram on the board before continuing. After that is done, you would need a power source, which is of course, none other than soul essence, which will need to guide it through the runic. While the sorcerer behind this process think about the desired outcome extremely hard, imagine it like pouring Q physical manifestation of your will upon the runic circle and poof. You get an enchanted sword. Hugo scribbled everything in his notebook, but now he understood everything. Hugo felt even more confused than ever. I know learning runic language is hard, but is it really that easy to enchant something? Surely runic sorcery doesn't only apply to swords and armor, it can also enchant places, utility objects and much more, so why don't more people learn it, even if it's hard? Miss J looked at him for a moment before chuckling slightly. Then she spoke in a calm tone. "You really are too optimistic, aren't you?" she said, her voice growing a bit grim before adding, "Do you realize how long an awakened lifespan is?" That single question, which seemed to come out of nowhere, surprised Hugo. It was trick, of course. She didn't mean the fact that awakened live short life. No, she meant that awakened don't get to live long enough to enjoy their extended lifespan because of the fact they got killed so oftenly in the dream realm. Quote. "Not long," he said with a solemn voice. She simply nodded. "Exactly, not long. Most awakened focus on mastering their aspects and combat skills to prepare for either conquering nightmares or protecting something they value. Those who don't want to risk their lives fighting abominations often live without interacting with any mystical parts of the dream realm," she said before adding with a bit of a pride in her tone. "And the few people like me, who study runic language and sorcery, are usually taken by clan valor who have mastered runic sorcery and evolved it into an entirely new realm of enchanting. But of course, their ways and teachings are kept secret from the rest of the world for obvious reasons. So that's how it is," he thought, wondering how advanced the artisans of valor were. But then a strange question popped into his head. This one, unlike the dozens of cosmic questions, actually had an answer, but he was nervous to ask it. Eventually, he swallowed his nervousness, his curiosity winning in the end. "Miss J, please don't take this as an insult, but why haven't you joined valor yourself?" He had found it a bit strange that someone who was at least adept at runic sorcery was a teacher in the academy who only taught 4 students, 5, including Hugo, instead of reveling in the riches of valor. She tilted her head a little, a strange, nostalgic expression appearing on her face. "Well, at first, I thought of doing just that, but I decided against it because of a naive dream of mine," she said, brushing her hair slightly. "I wanted to share my knowledge with dreamers and awakened of the academy in hopes that they might one day use that knowledge to survive. Teaching was always an interesting profession to me. But alas, you can see how that turned out. In fact, I'm planning on retiring from the academy soon enough, so you might very well be the last student I teach, well, besides the other 3 rascals who are already my students, but you get the point." Hugo nodded, strangely feeling inspired by his teacher's strange dream. The idea of an awakened aiding society through means other than just killing nightmare creatures was something that warmed Hugo's heart greatly. But alas, that was not a path he could follow himself. 2 weeks later, a strange gray creature, barely 6 inches tall with frog-like eyes and head, was currently scribbling something on a sheet of paper. Instantly after the strange ritualistic process ended, the paper suddenly became incredibly sharp, with the runes on it igniting with a soft azure light. Yes, it worked," the gray creature shouted in its high-pitched voice with a mad smile on its face. Hugo had done it. After only 2 weeks of learning runic sorcery by memorizing all the important steps through extraordinary memory, and then reapplying all of the steps when he transformed into a Galvan through linguistic mastery, he finally could successfully enchant a mundane object through a perfect runic circle. This runic circle, in particular, contained the runes representing durability, sharpness, and cutting. Its power source was a portion of Hugo's own soul essence that he had poured into it while transformed as a Galvan. The paragon of purity picked up the sheet of paper, which was now a bit gigantic for his small body, but still posed no weight for his awakened biology, and then he uncharacteristically tossed it towards the wall to test how strong it was. Thud! The sharp piece of paper hit the wall, impaling it directly without meeting any resistance. "So I was correct. The effectiveness of the enchantments is determined by the quality of my essence. Meaning once I rise in rank, I'd be able to create even more powerful enchantments," he exclaimed with a strange fascination that came with his hyper-intelligent brain. "Now, this could solve the problem of me lacking a weapon." His third goal of acquiring a memory weapon had gone terribly these last few days. There was no suitable way for him to acquire a memory besides trading one of his existing ones, which he wasn't willing to do. Proto-Tech armor was his only armor and thus held equal worth to any weapon Hugo could have, while Polymorphic Crystal and Conqueror's Wrath were simply too powerful and useful to trade for anything. So he turned to the next best thing. The spell can keep its stingy memories. I'm going to make a weapon for myself. With the right materials, he could definitely make something extremely powerful, not to mention the upgrade enchantment which could evolve any object he makes. The small Galvan puffed his chest in victory, relishing at his achievement, but then he suddenly saw the time and date on his gigantic communicator screen, making him pause for a while. The winter solstice was only 4 days away. Hugo scoffed as he was reminded of that fact. So what? I'm the wielder of the most powerful relic in the world. And I possess the ability to morph into almost any creature. Not to mention my current galvanic form possesses extreme intelligence, so what's a mere winter solstice going to do? I will survive, and not only that, I will thrive, gain strength and climb the path of ascension by conquering the second and third nightmare. He exclaimed, his tiny gray hands raised into a fist. And why stop only at that? I will conquer the fourth nightmare, the fifth, the sixth, and all the nightmares above that. Nothing will stop me, not the nightmare spell and not these hideous abominations. He shouted at the ceiling, his resolve unwavering. Hugo would have usually cringed at a scene like this, but he wasn't in his right mind currently, so he was enjoying the sensation. Well, that was the case up until the point he started hearing a certain peeping sound coming from the Omnitrix on his back. 4 days later, Hugo woke up with an annoyed expression, his room filled with scraps and random materials he had collected from the academy while experimenting with his galvanic form and runic sorcery. Even though he had slept for a long time yesterday, he was not feeling refreshed in the slightest. That was because a strange sense of drowsiness was strangely tugging at his senses, digging deep into his core and reaching his soul and trying to pull it somewhere else. To the dream realm. Today was the day where all sleepers on the world would be judged. Today was the winter solstice. Dream Realm, Chapter 20, Dream Realm. Hugo slowly went through his morning routine, savoring every moment of luxury he could get, knowing he might not see that same luxury for a long time once he entered the Dream Realm. After showering, he wore his clothes and left his room to go towards the cafeteria. Immediately after entering, he felt the grimness of everyone inside practically radiating through the air, with every sleeper feeling a terrible sense of dread at the looming solstice. Even the proud legacies weren't looking too relaxed. Hugo quickly poured food onto his tray and went to sit in his usual spot near Cassia and Sunless. The tension in the air was strangely the same. The trio practically never talked to each other, so even though the winter solstice was today, nothing really changed about their interactions. However, that did not mean they weren't afraid. Cassia especially, due to her flaw, she was practically a walking corpse, doomed to die in the dream realm, which was exactly why Hugo never tried to interact with her more than needed. Sunless must feel the same way, Hugo thought, eating in grim anticipation. Right after he finished his food, he hesitated for a bit before speaking in a stiff tone. Hey, Cassia, Sunny, if we ever end up in the same place in the dream realm, let's help each other out. Sunny looked at him without saying anything, a strange emotion tugging on his face. Maybe, he said with a measured tone, clearly showing his doubt about the chance of them ending up in the same place. Cassia, on the other hand, only smiled a little. Yeah, that would be nice. Although that smile did not quite reach her face, making Hugo feel a pang of sharp guilt in his heart. Focus, Hugo, you can't be feeling bad for others when you're still in danger. With that, Hugo got up from the table, giving Sunny and Cassia a small nod. I should go say goodbye to my teachers now. Hugo knocked on the runic sorcery classroom door, not sure if there was anyone inside in the first place. Come in. With a relieved sigh, he opened the door and entered the empty classroom, finding Miss J leaning at her desk, looking at the empty room without particularly doing anything. She tilted her head, looking at him with a smile. You know, I wasn't sure you'd come to see your humble teacher before you enter the dream realm. So color me surprised. Hugo raised an eyebrow in confusion. I mean, it would be pretty disrespectful if I didn't. You taught me a lot of important stuff, after all. She sighed slightly before adding, I was just kidding, geez. You're way too serious compared to the other three idiots, even the twins aren't as robotic as you are. She stretched slightly before continuing. You know, if you come back from the dream realm in about a month or two, you'd get to be here at my retirement party. Hugo smiled before saying, I'd try my best. If I take a little longer than 2 months, please leave some cake for me. She chuckled. It would be easier to kill an unholy titan than to save up any food when the twins are in the vicinity, but I'll try. Eventually, she stopped laughing and looked at him with a serious expression. So you should make sure to survive long enough to enjoy that piece of cake, paragon of purity, understood? Hugo nodded, a bit unsure if the motivation of eating a piece of cake was enough to survive the dream realm. After the conversation with Miss J, Hugo went to see Instructor Rock to thank him for all his teachings and training in the last 3 weeks. Entering the silent training dojo of the academy, Hugo instantly spotted the giant man standing in the middle of the room, looking at the training ground with a reminiscent expression. Hugo approached slowly, but the seasoned awakened already sensed him. "Sleeper Hugo, you do know that all classes are dismissed today, right?" he said with a firm voice without turning back. Hugo studied the man for a moment before speaking in a calm tone. "Well, I thought I'd come to thank you for personally training me. You do realize it's my job, right? Well, even if it is, you could have easily refused to train me when I used my aspect without suffering any consequences, but you didn't. Which means a lot to me. So, Instructor Rock, thank you for everything. I will make sure to repay this debt once I come back from the dream realm as an awakened." Rock's shoulders stiffened a little as he let out a sharp exhale. "You're really something, aren't you, brat?" He finally turned back, showing his face, which had an unusually sad expression on it. "Make sure to survive, Sleeper Hugo. The dead can't repay their debts, you know." Hugo nodded firmly, locking eyes with Rock. "I will." When the sun was close to setting, Instructor Rock gathered all the sleepers in the foyer of the Sleeper Center and led them outside. In the snowy parks that surrounded the white building, other awakened were leading their own batches of sleepers to the same destination. It was the Academy's medical center. The center looked more like a shrine than a hospital. Its interior contained both highly advanced technology as well as some of the best healers among the awakened. For the duration of their first journey into the dream realm, the bodies of sleepers would be kept safe in specially designed pods and sustained by the magical powers of those healers if anything unfortunate were to happen on the other side of the spell. Of course, whether or not they would wake up in the end wholly depended on the sleepers themselves. Strangely enough, after entering the medical center, Instructor Rock did not take them directly to the wing containing sleeper pods. Instead, he led them to a comparatively deserted floor and then opened the doors to a spacious gallery that was brightly illuminated by the beautiful crimson rays of the setting sun. There, they saw rows and rows of wheelchairs. In each wheelchair, there was a person with a blank, strangely peaceful expression on their face. All these people were completely silent, motionless, and still. They did not show any reaction to the appearance of guests. They all seemed to be empty. In the eerie silence, Hugo frowned a little, recognizing what these people were. Instructor Rock looked at the empty people with solemn eyes. "There is a reason I brought you all here. Look well and remember, some of you may know who these people are, for those of you who don't, they are called Hollow." He gritted his teeth. Each one of them was once either a sleeper or an awakened. Some of them were weak, some of them were strong. Some were even incredibly powerful. All of them have perished in the dream realm. I really hope none of us end up like this, Hugo thought with a grim expression on his face. If you're lucky, once your spirit is destroyed, your body dies with it. But if not, you'll become just like them. Hollow. Instructor Rock glanced in the direction of Hugo, then turned to Nephis and a certain legacy that Hugo did not know the name of, and then added. "So don't die out there." Half an hour later, sleepers had been led to their personal rooms and were preparing to enter the pods. In one of the rooms, a blind girl was entering her pod, a look of grim and strange acceptance in her beautiful blue eyes. In another room, a certain proud legacy caster was staring listlessly at the floor. His lips were moving, repeating one strange phrase over and over again. He was trembling. Somewhere else, Changing Star Nephis, the last daughter of the immortal Flame clan, was looking down at her hands. Underneath her skin, soft white radiance was slowly growing brighter and brighter. Her face was contorted in a grimace of harrowing agony. And then there was a room where Shadow Slave Sunless, lost from light, turned away from the sleeping pod and glanced down at his shadow, muttering something to it, before entering his own pod. Finally, the Paragon of Purity stood near his own dream pod, his eyes drowsy and tired. He looked at his left arm. The Omnitrix symbol was glowing brightly as if excited by the prospect of entering the dream realm. But Hugo paid it no mind for now. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't get to visit your grave," Hugo said, addressing no one in particular, his expression unreadable. "After I awaken, I'll buy you plenty of flowers, the blue ones you always liked," he said before slowly entering his pod and closing his eyes. Darkness quickly consumed the Paragon of Purity, transferring him to an entirely different realm. Amidst that darkness, he heard the familiar voice of the spell whispering in his ear. "Welcome to the dream realm, Hugo. Hugo, immediately after hearing the voice of the spell, found himself falling at an incredible speed. Instantly, he willed Proto-Tech armor and Conqueror's Wrath to materialize. The armor quickly encased his body while the charm appeared gently on his neck, filling his body with power. Right as he was about to transform, he suddenly found himself not falling anymore. He had fallen, but not on ground, instead, he was in water. Hugo accidentally opened his mouth, making the salty water rush in. "Damn it," he cursed, trying to find his balance, which was quickly secured thanks to aquatic balance enchantment from his charm. Although that did not fix his other problem. His vision. The body of water he was in was completely black, rendering his vision useless. Deciding to swim upward first, Hugo quickly reached the surface, breaking through with rapid gasps of breath. When he opened his eyes, he found nothing. There was no sky, no moon, and no stars in the sky. There was simply nothing. A sea. Is this the storm sea? He thought, trying to get a better grasp of his environment. But it seemed his first visit to the dream realm was not going to be so simple. Not even a full minute since he regained his breath, Hugo heard the sound of water splashing, and then a massive pressure jumped out of the water. Without even identifying the figure, Hugo raised the dial of the Omnitrix, hitting it as fast as he could. A flash of blue light illuminated the dark world, showing the terrible abomination that was attacking him. Its body was a pale gray, possessing a strange webbed digits, 4 on the hands and 2 other on its feet, the former of which hosted yellow claws. The creature sported gills going down neck to torso, as well as patches of scales all over its hideous body. On his arms and atop his neck were short swamp green fins. The stem of the angler sprouting from its head appeared the same color as his webbing. Lastly, it possessed strange circular eyes, appeared vapid, and entirely lacked lips to hide away its harrowing teeth. When not forming a fish-like tail, he had a loincloth, segmented by off-white lines. Unfortunately for the harrowing abomination, the shower of light lasted for only a second before a massive, tentacled fist slammed into it, sending it flying back into the water. Now in the form of a chimera sui generis, Hugo was no longer a helpless sleeper. He was now an awakened noble beast with the instincts and reflexes of a killer. Not to mention, he could breathe and move inside water perfectly. Immediately, Hugo swam towards the abomination, augmenting himself with his soul essence as he began to strangle the nightmare shark. Then his other arms started punching it over and over again. His already powerful punches were enhanced by both soul essence and Conqueror's Wrath, making him devastatingly powerful. And so in just a couple of hits, Hugo's fist broke through the carcasses, impaling the strange humanoid reptile. But the abomination was stubborn, deciding to keep fighting despite being impaled. It thrashed and spun violently in the water, with Hugo latching onto it like a parasite, slowly tearing its guts and insides away. The dark sea was painted crimson as Hugo kept tearing the abomination apart until he eventually reached deep within the abomination's chest, finding its soul cores and quickly clutching his giant hand, crushing all 4 of them at once. The nightmare creature screamed, with its movement slowly growing sluggish and weak as its soul started to crumble. Not long after that, Hugo heard the sweet voice of the spell speak. "You have slain an awakened demon, cursed dweller. You have received a memory." The rush of satisfaction from slaying his first nightmare creature felt like heaven, but his situation was still dire, considering a swarm of the same race as the shark abomination could come after him at any moment. Especially now that he was on a timer. Hugo grimaced at the fact that he wouldn't be able to absorb its destroyed soul shards. But that did not mean he wouldn't get payment for his trouble before leaving the corpse drown in the sea. Reaching deep within him, he activated his innate ability, Essence Imprint, and focused on the corpse. Unidentified DNA sample detected. Scanning. Opening square bracket ... closing square bracket. Essence Imprint succeeded. Smirking, Hugo quickly began maneuvering underwater, trying to find nearby land. Being blind and underwater was quite a dangerous problem, but he currently possessed the perfect biology to survive the terrain, so it wasn't that bad. Although Hugo doubted he'd be able to survive the harrowing depth dwellers. Focus. He extended his senses, which seemed to be functioning more effectively underwater, making able to sense any dangerous creature nearby. And soon enough, he did. A gigantic shark-like abomination was swimming fast through the waters, chasing after a strange small black dot. The black dot suddenly rose from the water and disappeared, making the creature spin around in the water. Land. It was the only logical conclusion to how the black dot disappeared completely from the surface of the water. That or it somehow flew away. Hugo was willing to believe the former, and so he contemplated attempting to swim there. Could I kill something like that? He frowned, realizing that its rank was definitely higher than the abomination he just killed. But then, something else happened. The water rippled as Hugo could sense the gigantic creature being pulled by something to the depths by another by a mass of dark tentacles. His eyes widened, but he wasted no time. Immediately saturating his body with as much essence as it allowed, he swam like a bolt, reaching the strange platform in mere moments. His sharp claws pierced the stone as he quickly began climbing the wet stone, hurriedly scaling the giant structure before the creature returned. Finally, before he could finish his words, something hit his head, making him reel a little, but the force of the impact was not enough to make him fall off just yet. It was a leg. A human leg, to be precise. Looking up, Hugo sensed a figure standing on the platform, and judging by the strength of the kick, that figure was merely a sleeper. Wait, I'm a human. This is a transformation ability. Hugo shouted before the mysterious figure used any of their weapon memories to stab him in the head. Strangely enough, the figure seemed to believe that instantly, giving Hugo some time to climb the platform fully and step away from the edge. Sunny's POV. Sunny's luck was currently nothing short of abysmal. He had entered the dream realm, and not even 10 minutes later, he drowned and then got chased by a harrowing abomination the size of a house. Then, after escaping towards a stone platform he found by sheer luck. Moments later, he saw the same abomination that chased him being drowned by dark tentacles that impaled its body like toy. As the sea slowly calmed, Sunny had thought that was the end of his terrible luck, but then another abomination climbed out of the sea, sticking to the platform like an insect before reaching the surface. Without having anything to defend himself with, Sunny simply kicked the abomination, hoping it will fall back into the sea. But it didn't, and then he realized that the abominable creature was actually familiar. Not only that, the creature was one that he had seen before in the waking world. In fact, he had seen it every day for 3 weeks straight. Well, it wasn't always in this form, but Sunny quickly recognized the creature identity. It was the paragon of purity, the mysterious sleeper who had come out of nowhere 3 weeks before the winter solstice and placed second in the rankings, right beneath Changing Star of the Immortal Flame clan. Through excessive observation with his shadow, totally not stalking, Sunny had found out that this mysterious prodigy's aspect included turning into a terrifying tentacle monster that was 15 feet tall, making Sunny envious of how powerful such an ability was. There was also the fact that the mysterious sleeper possessed a very bizarre shadow. It's wrong. Everything about it is wrong, Sunny thought as he once again felt the wrongness emitted from Hugo's shadow. Luckily, or unluckily, the situation was quite grim, so the feeling of wrongness was drowned by the need of survival. Sorry for kicking you, I panicked, Sunny said in a hesitant tone, while Hugo kept silence. Making the treacherous Lost from Light speak again, this time in a more hesitant tone. Just to be sure, you're the same guy the first ate breakfast with this morning, right? Yes, the paragon of purity said, his voice while transformed sounding nothing like his usual form. Who would have thought we'd actually end up in the same area? Sunny mumwered, thanking the dead gods that he hadn't aggravated Hugo during their stay at the academy, like he had with many other sleepers. Well, I really don't know what to say in this situation, but I think we should watch out for any abominations coming from the sea. Hugo nodded his tentacled head. All right, I could have sworn he seemed more social during the academy. What's wrong with him? Sunny thought, unaware that Hugo was currently fighting against the urge to shout an opera of slurs at him for the kick that was delivered to his face. Are you crazy? Chapter 20. Are you crazy? Around 10 minutes after their peculiar meeting, Hugo's timer ran out and he once again reverted to his human form. Although both Hugo and Sunny were afraid that the red flash would attract some horrible monstrosities, their intuition turned out wrong and no abomination crawled from the sea. However, Sunny did seem to be curious about how Hugo's aspect worked, but he did not make any attempt to pry into his secrets for now, which Hugo greatly appreciated, so in turn he didn't ask Sunny any questions either. And so, for around half an hour, they simply stayed silent, watching the dark sea and dreading any abomination that came out from it. Hugo finally decided to break the silence with a question, growing extremely bored with their current situation. Hey Sunless, do you think we're in the storm sea? Sunny shifted slightly in the darkness, unsure of what to say. Then a moment later he spoke in a hesitant tone. Quote, I'm not sure. I might not be the most knowledgeable person about the dream realm, but from what I read, the storm sea is nothing like this place, considering the lack of stars and the entirety of the moon. He said grimly, making both of their moods sour a little as they slowly came to a dreadful realization that none of them wanted to face. After a bit of contemplating, Hugo spoke in a natural tone. I think I might have a way to check. The pale boy raised his eyebrow. How? Hugo was silent for a moment, then a small clicking sound was heard by Sunny as the Omnitrix dial turned from red to its usual blue once more. I'm going to transform and try swimming around to look for any land. What, are you crazy? Did you not see the terrifying abominations, or do you simply want to die that much? The boy shouted, although his shouts were extremely muffled, afraid to draw the attention of the creatures in the depths. Hugo smirked slightly, then answered, well, I guess I'm a bit crazy now that I think about it. Before Sunny could retort, Hugo jumped off the edge of the platform, leaping towards the dark sea. Then moments he reached impact, the Omnitrix dial shot upward revealing his newest imprint. Essence imprint, Piscis Volan. Imprint rank, Awakened. Imprint class, Beast. Imprint description, the deadliest sea lurkers in the history of the Forgotten Shore. The only thing that rivaled their ferocity was their suffering. Imprint attributes, Seafarer, Sharp Monster, Undersea Sprint, Creature of the Dark. Imprint abilities, Seafarer description, you are a creature of the sea. Sharp Monster description, your teeth and tail were made to hunt. Undersea Sprint description, you are unnaturally fast underwater. Creature of the Dark attribute description, you were born in the dark, thus it is the only thing you see. Hugo's skin shifted gray as his torso extended, his eyes went blank, losing their pupils. At the same time, a strange horn adorned with a squishy ball sprouted from his head like a third eye. His legs merged and shifted into a long tail, giving him the look of a mermaid, although he was not beautiful type as he looked more of an abomination you'd find on Earth's oceans rather than a mermaid. In his new form, Hugo entered the sea, feeling more at home in this form than when he was transformed into Vilgax. This imprint was incredibly powerful for underwater battle and movement considering it was faster than Vilgax and possessed the ability to see perfectly in the dark due to Creature of the Dark attribute. His chances of survival underwater were probably better than they were on land, especially when paired with Conqueror's Wrath charm, but that wasn't the sole reason Hugo was confident enough to dive into the harrowing sea. It was his new memory that was filling him with confidence. Memory, Black Pearl Trident. Memory rank, Awakened. Memory tier, 3. Memory type, Weapon. Memory description, they were born for failure in a god-forsaken land with no hope of surviving the creeping corruption, their only solace was in death. Enchantments, Tormented Vortex, Silent Stalker. Tormented description, all beings hit by this trident will suffer the torment of the Piscis Volan. Vortex enchantment, this trident can create powerful vortexes. Silent Stalker enchantment description, this trident hides its wielder from prying eyes. All of the enchantments combined with the transformation and Hugo's charm made him perfectly suited for seafaring, so he was pretty confident of being able to escape most abominations, although he was still on a timer so he had to use his time wisely. The trident materialized in brilliant sparks, hurting Hugo's sensitive eyes for a moment. It was a long silver trident with 4 sharp teeth on its end radiating an aura of death. Well, it's not really a spear, but it'll do. With perfect vision underwater, he swam through the sea with terrible speed, looking for any land beside the platform. The first few minutes passed without Hugo spotting anything in particular. There was no land in the entire region aside from the stone platform, which made Hugo appreciate his luck. But that appreciation did not last for long. Hugo spotted gigantic shapes in the sea, but they were not abominations, no, they were a single deadly hunter killing its prey. The hunter in question was the same giant black tentacles that drowned the shark abomination chasing Sunny. It seemed the abomination did not satisfy its hunger, which made Hugo shiver as he tried assessing its rank and class. Then another set of tentacles emerged from the depths, reaching for none other than Hugo. With incredible speed, he spun around the abomination's body parts, his tail and biology making his speed beyond what an awakened should even be capable of, locking the tentacles in a knot as the abomination mindlessly attempted to reach him. Then, just as he found an opening, he struck his trident, thrusting it like a spear into the dark tendrils of darkness. Screech. The tendrils resisted at first but were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer might of the trident. After all, not only was Hugo augmenting himself with soul essence but he also had polymorphic crystal, upgrading the memory into the ascended rank. The tendrils separated from the massive body, falling into the depths of the sea. At the same time, the water began to ripple and the tides picked up on the surface. The harrowing creature was wincing in pain from the tormented enchantment. But that was not all of it. The creature, while in pain, seemed to begin its ascent to face the insignificant creature who dared harm it. That insignificant creature, sensing what was going to happen, simply raised its trident, pouring his essence into it. The waters rippled once more. This time, however, it began spinning in circles, eventually turning into a gigantic maze of wind that instantly compressed underwater. The surrounding water pressure compressed the air, reducing its volume and increasing its density and pressure. Hugo would have widened his eyes if he had proper eyelids, looking at the intensity and power of the vortex enchantment, which was currently of the ascended rank. Although its power was great, it was also draining his soul essence incredibly fast. No time to waste, he thought grimly before rushing forward to make his escape. And just as Hugo did that, he looked down and saw something that sent in crippling fear into his soul. In the depths, a gargantuan body of dark mass was fighting the approaching vortex. It had dozens of long dark tentacles enveloping it and hundreds of other lesser abominations at the same time. At its center was a giant red eye shimmering in the darkness. That same eye locked into Hugo, making him shiver and feel utterly small despite all of his extraordinary abilities. The spell is fair. Bullshit, he thought grimly as he swam as fast as he could. Just then, he began hearing the voice of the spell. You have slain an awakened beast. You have slain a dormant monster. You have slain a dormant demon. You have slain a dormant devil. You have. The spell's voice continued, crediting him with dozens of kills from the vortex he unleashed, although the creatures were mostly of the dormant rank, with the strongest being an awakened demon, though he did hear the spell granting him some memories but he didn't have the time to check them out. Sunny's POV. The sea surface opened as a terrifying abomination leapt upward towards a strange stone platform. The creature was a dark blue chimera between a squid and a fish. However, before it could reach the boy on the stone hand, another, more terrifying abomination reached from the sea, this one wielding a mighty silver trident. The creature jumped high into the sea, bringing its trident down the chimera-like divine judgment, impaling the fish-like creature and killing it instantly. Sunny, still terrified and on the edge of the platform, ready to escape into the sea, looked at the monstrous figure, noticing that the creature that had saved him seemed more civilized than other nightmare creatures, as it did not radiate the profane stench of a nightmare creature like Mountain King or its larva did. It also had a strange symbol on its chest, which started glowing red instantly before flashing a bit of light. In the next moment, instead of an abomination, a boy around Sunny's age, wearing a black and blue advanced armor while wielding a mighty trident, appeared. You're alive. Sunny's eyes widened as he saw the shapeshifter look perfectly fine after taking a stroll through the dark sea. Hugo tilted his head. Why wouldn't I be? You didn't really think I'd jump into a sea infested with abominations if I didn't know I could survive, did you? Sunny remained silent for a moment, struggling as if something was compelling him to answer. Yes, I really thought you were crazy. I mean, you did say you were, so it's your fault. But that aside, what did you do when you got in? I saw something happen while you were gone, and it did not look pretty. Hugo shrugged slightly as he bent down to extract the soul shards from the fish abomination before saying in a calm tone. I tried looking for land or maybe even some awakened from House Knight, but I didn't find anything like that. Instead, I found a terrifying leviathan who is most likely a titan. It's the source of the black tendrils. Sunny instantly paled at the mention of a titan, but he did not know whether to be scared about the titan itself or about how nonchalant the boy was at mentioning a natural calamity like it was a nuisance. You're joking, right? Sunny said in a hesitant tone, hoping it was a lie. Hugo simply shook his head. His face, while neutral, was still filled with seriousness. He then grabbed the soul shards and crushed them instantly, absorbing them in front of Sunny's astonished eyes. If you're wondering, the titan might be of the awakened rank. One of my weapons managed to cut its tendrils without much trouble, so if it comes back again, I should be able to kill it. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Oh really? You, a mere sleeper, can kill an awakened titan? Did getting a true name fry your brain or something? It's an awakened titan, for spell's sake. Paragon of purity, more like paragon of stupidity. he shouted at Hugo, who was looking at him strangely. But then, before Hugo could defend, something miraculous happened. The dark sea, which had been shifting for a while now, seemingly began to recede. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster, the water level was dropping. The circular stone formation they had been taking shelter on used to barely protrude out of the waves, but now there were meters and meters of wet rock between him and the restless surface of the sea. As the sun climbed up, the monstrous ebb tide continued. Soon, Sunny and Hugo found themselves standing on the edge of a tall cliff, with a 100-meter drop separating them from the churning waters. Beneath, the rock formation broadened and changed shape. However, from their current vantage point, it was hard to determine what that shape was, exactly. At that time, the dark surface of the water began to be punctured here and there by sharp crimson blades. As it dropped even further, it was as though a crimson forest was slowly rising from the black depths. The trees were made of something resembling coral, growing chaotically into each other and stretching toward the sky. They were colossal in size, with irregular protrusions entwining and merging together, looking monumental and eerie in the black and red reality of the sunlit void. The labyrinth formed by this strange reef stretched as far as Sunny and Hugo could see, broken here and there by protruding cliffs, sudden chasms, and distant natural features. Half an hour later, utterly shocked, Sunny and Hugo stared down and realized that the sea was completely gone. If not for the black seaweed left hanging on wet rocks and scarlet pillars of coral, one would even doubt if it was ever there. Their small circular island had turned into the peak of a strange, towering, irregularly shaped cliff. Looking down, he felt his head spinning before speaking. "Well, I don't think Teacher Julius taught me anything about this." "Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Huh, my name is Sunny, I thought you knew that." Hugo looked at him with a deadpan expression on his face, now illuminated by the sun. "What, Sherlock Holmes, as in the duh. You know what, never mind," he sighed before taking in the breathtakingly and slightly horrifying sight. "So what do we do now?" Sunny tilted his head slightly. "I don't know, why are you asking me? You're the one who transforms into monsters." That sounded incredibly racist, but I'll have you know I also don't know what to do. Also, the creatures I turn into are noble beasts, not monsters, he said, his tone a bit too sharp. "I am not. How was I supposed to know what they were called?" Sunny said strangely, feeling the need to justify himself, which was quite ridiculous considering the nature of their situation. But the paragon of purity seemed to be offended about calling his transformations monsters. Sunny shivered slightly. "Great, so I'm stuck with a shapeshifting maniac in hell. Just my luck, why couldn't I got transported to the same region as Changing Star or something?" He sighed inwardly, cursing his luck before looking down at the ground. "Maybe we should climb down," Hugo suggested, looking at Sunny, who seemed to be contemplating his life choices. After a moment of silence, Sunny's eyes grew focused as he spoke. "No, it's too dangerous, even with the two of us." He stopped for a moment, as if debating whether he should continue or not, then he opened his mouth again hesitantly. "My aspect allows me to scout, so I should be able to check if there's any danger around." Hugo nodded before noticing that Sunny's shadow separated from his feet and started gliding down the platform. When it passed by Hugo's shadow, it reeled slightly as if making a disgusted expression. "Huh, don't tell me my own shadow is racist. Come on, Gloomy, don't make the situation worse." The shadow, however, paid him no mind and began its descent down the statue while Sunny closed his eyes, focusing his vision on it. Hugo watched with curious eyes as his new shadowy companion was scouting. "What a useful ability," he muttered, remembering how his own shadow could only turn into a bridge, and that was when it wanted to. Looking down, Hugo scowled slightly before saying, "You should be more like Sunny's shadow." And once again, he was met with no response, which was a bit disappointing. But that disappointment did not last, as Sunny shifted slightly, having found something through his shadow control. A Night with a Shadow. Chapter 22, A Night with a Shadow. Sunny sat there meditating, his consciousness seeing through his shadow's eyes as it scouted the area below. Not wanting to disturb him, Hugo summoned his runes, eager to inspect the new memories he had acquired. He had gained 3 new memories, which was disappointing considering how many creatures he had slain with the vortex earlier, but a memory was still a memory. Memory: Emerald Spyglass. Memory rank: Dormant. Memory tier: 3. Memory type: Utility. Memory description: the tears of a blind poet who loved imagination. Memory enchantments. Clear sight, true vision, false vision. Clear sight enchantment description. This spyglass can see further than eyes. True vision enchantment description. This spyglass shows the truth behind illusions. False vision enchantment description. This spyglass can show illusions only to its wielder. Memory. Heart compass. Memory rank. Dormant. Memory tier. I. Memory description. They looked for salvation but found only their doom. Memory enchantments. Direction. Direction description. This compass may guide its wielder to what they most desire. Memory. Chitinous corpus. Memory rank. Dormant. Memory tier. I. Memory description. A sturdy suit of armor, like a second skin. Enchantments. Chitin. Chitin description. This corpus is sturdier than steel. So, an armor weaker than proto-tech armor, and 2 useful utility memories. Interesting. He thought before quickly summoning the emerald spyglass. A spyglass made of onyx stone riddled with runes appeared in his hand in a small shower of white sparks. It had 2 emeralds, one on the eyepiece and one on the objective lens, both perfectly reflecting the sun's light. So it grants me great vision, lets me see through illusions, and can even make me see my own illusions. Hugo was baffled by its strange but incredibly useful nature for scouting. He briefly considered trading it to Sunny for something but quickly dismissed the idea as he still couldn't bring himself to fully trust the shadowy sleeper just yet, and the spyglass was still useful for him. Bringing the spyglass to his eye, Hugo looked far into the distance, focusing on the terrifying coral labyrinth. Instantly, his vision magnified, the details sharpening as if he were using a modern high-powered camera from the waking world. The area was laid bare before him, exposing its treacherous terrain and, more importantly, the abominations hidden within it. Most noticeable were the dozens of oversized crab creatures. They had terrifying blue carapaces and a myriad of oversized chitinous legs. What was even unnerving were their gigantic pincers, which looked capable of piercing through anything they touched. Definitely awakened abominations. A grim expression settled on Hugo's face as a dreadful realization began to solidify in his mind. They were in an undiscovered area of the dream realm. Considering its appearance so far does not match any of the regions conquered by human, and judging by the abominations and the strange receding sea, it was most likely a death zone. Before Hugo could summon the heart compass to try and locate a safe place, he saw Sunny's shadow slither back to its master, reattaching itself to his feet. Sunny wore a solemn look that told Hugo everything he needed to know. It's a death trap down there, Sunny said, his voice low and devoid of energy. There are dozens of abominations walking around. The most horrible of them are these strange, oversized crabs. Then we need to make a plan, but I think we should stay here for a while. We have this fish monster to eat so we can hold out for a day or 2. Hugo suggested. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Wow, and here I thought you'd turn into another noble creature and try your luck down there immediately. Hugo sat on the ground with a small, tired smile. That was a one-time thing I did because I needed to see if there was land. Now that I know the sea itself recedes whenever it pleases, and there's a labyrinth full of those things. Well, let's say I don't fancy my chances of outrunning these creatures on land. His hand ran through his hair a little as he continued, I'm not insane, Sunny. Sunny sighed and muttered something under his breath, just loud enough for Hugo to catch. Thank the dead gods he's not a complete lunatic. Hugo decided to let the comment slide. Hours later. Hugo and Sunny cooked a portion of the fish abomination, and despite the circumstances, Sunny remained suspicious, constantly asking if there was some hidden cost or condition for Hugo sharing the food with him from an abomination that he killed himself. The interaction gave Hugo a clearer grasp of Sunny's character. He was a deeply paranoid individual that trusted no one, which explained the strange, wary glances Hugo had received back at the academy. Eventually, Hugo just shrugged and said, suit yourself. More for me. He made a show of enjoying the cooked meat, and the sight, combined with his own gnawing hunger, finally broke Sunny's resistance, making him devour the food in an instant, though he was still tense. After the meal, Hugo decided to get some rest, which Sunny agreed to rather quickly, explaining that his shadow would wake them at the first sign of danger. In the middle of the night, a sudden impulse stirred Sunny awake. He jumped to his feet, his mind instantly flooded with tense apprehension. Was it the tentacled titan from before? Or had some other horror from the depths come for them? However, the sea was quiet and calm. He heard nothing abnormal around the statue. What is it? He whispered to his shadow. The shadow silently pointed a wispy limb in a particular direction. Turning his head, Sunny squinted. He quickly understood why it had woken him. Out in the distance, a few kilometers away, a small orange light shimmered in the darkness, its reflections rising and falling with the movement of the waves. It was too far to make out any details. After a short while, the light vanished. Sunny quickly shook Hugo awake. Hey, wake up, I saw something. Hugo was alert in an instant, his hand instinctively moving toward the Omnitrix. What, abominations? Maybe or maybe not. Sunny quickly recounted what he had seen. The fire could be the results of a nightmare creature ability. What do you think? Hugo contemplated for a moment before speaking. I think I have a way to check, making Sunny look at him suspiciously. Hugo summoned the heart compass. The beautiful golden compass appeared in his hand and he focused his intention on a single purpose, other sleepers, or the closest one near him. At first, the needle spun and pointed directly at Sunny, making the pale boy scowl for some reason. Then, it snapped decisively in another direction, the same one where the fire had been moments before. Definitely humans, Hugo stated. How reliable is that memory, though? Sunny asked, unconvinced. I'm not sure, Hugo admitted. Its enchantment says it may guides me to what my heart desires. Oh, I focused on finding other sleepers, and it pointed that way. It's the best lead we have. Sunny shook his head. That's not accurate enough. What if the sleepers aren't in that area but further beyond it? Or what if they're dead? Maybe your memory just detected their corpses. Either way, we need to be careful considering we're not even sure where we are in the dream realm. Hugo nodded, finding no flaw in Sunny's grim logic. The two of them laid back down and attempted to return to their slumber. However, restful sleep never came. They simply sat in the oppressive silence, each lost in his own thoughts, until the sun finally rose again and sent the dark sea into retreat. As soon as morning came, the pincer monsters crawled out from their hiding spots and rushed back to the giant carcass to continue their feast. Sunny watched them for a time, then walked to the opposite side of the platform to look in the direction of the mysterious light, while Hugo himself simply summoned his trident memory and begun thrusting it around to get a better grasp of it. At a considerable distance, 5 or 6 kilometers away, the ground rose to form a hill. On its summit, an especially massive coral pillar speared the sky. From the looks of it, its upper branches were just high enough to stay above the water at night. Various ideas stormed in Sunny's head, but only 2 questions were truly important. First, would they be able to find a path through the labyrinth and cover that distance in a single day? And more importantly, should they even attempt it? The light could be a trap as easily as it could be salvation. Not having enough information, Sunny settled back to study the monsters, sending his shadow to investigate the labyrinth's entrance. After a while, Hugo approached, after doing some scouting with his spyglass. You're thinking of going for it, aren't you? What else is there? Sunny replied, not taking his eyes off the distant hill. We can stay here, hunt these things by day, hide up here at night, and probably survive for a while. But to what end? Just to survive? I'd rather jump now and get it over with. Hugo was silent for a moment, understanding the sentiment. A life of constant, fearful survival wasn't a life at all. So, the light it is, he said. We'll need to move before they finish that carcass you told me about. Sunny finally turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. Hugo met his gaze steadily. Unless you'd prefer to navigate a death labyrinth full of awakened crabs alone. My transformations might come in handy, and frankly, staying here alone sounds just as suicidal. Sunny studied him for a long moment, the gears of paranoia and pragmatism turning in his head. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Fine. Hugo sighed a little. Am I really that untrustworthy? It's not like I'm a nightmare Cree. He paused for a moment. Wait, is it because I can turn into other creatures? Is Sunny racist? The idea was slowly creeping into his head, considering both Sunny himself and his shadow seemed to dislike him. Unknown to Hugo's internal laws, Sunny decided they would leave the headless statue the next morning, so the rest of the day using his shadow to explore paths and prepare. That night, a sudden storm descended upon the dark sea. Sunny's shadow stirred him awake in time to brace for the crushing winds and pelting rain. Storm. Hugo, get up, Sunny shouted over the gale. Usually, rain put him in a foul mood, but now he was too thirsty to care. Crouching low to avoid being blown off the platform, he cupped his hands and waited for them to fill with rainwater before drinking greedily. Hugo, now awake, did the same, his proto-tech armor shedding the heavy droplets of water. Fresh water. We should try to collect more. Sunny yelled, looking for anything that could hold it, which made Hugo a bit uncomfortable, but there wasn't much he could do. Strikes of lightning illuminated the churning sea. For a brief moment, a wide grin was visible on Sunny's face amidst the chaos. The storm raged for hours. They crouched in the middle of the platform, enduring its fury. More than once, a tall wave crashed over the knight's neck, threatening to wash them away. Both of them held tight to the deep grooves in the stone, clinging on for their lives. By morning, when the storm finally dissipated, every muscle in their bodies was sore and aching. But there was no time to waste. As soon as the pincer monsters returned to the carcass, the two sleepers moved to the edge of the platform. "Ready?" Hugo asked, his voice tight. "No," Sunny answered honestly. "But let's go." With that, they slid over the edge and began to nimbly climb down. Sunny, with his shadow-scouted route, took the lead, with Hugo following behind carefully. Despite the danger, Sunny felt his mood improve. Passivity did not suit him. Now, even if his plan ended in failure, at least he was going down doing something he had decided to do. Trying and failing was better than not trying at all. Besides, having a shapeshifting monster was definitely a huge moral boost. The black mud at the bottom was deep and tried to suck at their boots, but it wasn't as bad as they had feared. With some practice, they were soon able to move at an acceptable speed. As long as they stuck to the shadows, their steps were light and silent. They headed for one of the paths that was supposed to lead to the distant hill and entered the cool, oppressive shade of the Crimson Labyrinth. Immediately, a strange feeling enveloped them. It was as if the world beyond the labyrinth had ceased to exist, leaving only its twisting, dark paths. This thing seems endless, Hugo thought, a shiver running down his spine. Shaking his head, Sunny sent the shadow to scout ahead. Their lives now depended on reaching the distant hill before the sun set and the dark sea returned in an unstoppable, drowning flood. The shadow moved ahead, initially meeting no resistance. It would sometimes climb high to scout the direction of different paths, allowing them to choose the optimal route. However, they still had to backtrack a couple of times after finding a dead end or a path leading in the wrong direction. Despite the tension, everything seemed to be going smoothly. Their guard, ever so slightly, began to lower. Sunny, confident in his preparations and his shadow, began to assume that maybe, just maybe, they would make it. That arrogance was their mistake. Hugo was just about to suggest a short rest when the mud directly in front of Sunny erupted. In the next moment, a massive, steel-blue pincer shot out of the ground and tore through the air, its crushing edges aiming to cut the shadow user's body in half. Dash dash dash. A flash of blue light resonated through the labyrinth ground as the giant pincer was suddenly blocked by something. A gigantic tentacled green arm belonging to a certain mean-looking octopus creature. Hugo snarled as he summoned his trident, which adjusted its size to fit him. Sunny, which was next him, immediately backed away, keeping a safe distance. Hugo shot forward, using the trident to cut the giant crab. His first thrust went through the armored chitin but suddenly stuck there, refusing to leave. Then, taking the opportunity, the abomination used its other pincer and brought it down, intending to crush Hugo. Thankfully, Hugo was a little bigger than it when in Vilgax's form and managed to hold it off. "A little help in here," he shouted, his voice more like a violent command in his current form. Sunny shifted slightly, unsure what to do, but then his eyes darted around, noticing a long, smooth, sharp bone left behind by some unknown creature sticking from the mud. Sunny immediately rushed forward, catching the sharp bones. At the same time, Hugo saturated his body with essence, overpowering the crab creature and driving his trident deep within its right pincer, slicing it off instantly. Moment later, Sunny leapt from a small hill on the ground, landing above the giant crab and stabbed it into eyes. The creature struggled and desperately fought for its life, but alas, the treacherous shadow kept impaling the creature while a vile shapeshifter held it down in place. Not long after, its body finally went still and Sunny heard the voice of the spell in his ears. "You have slain an awakened beast, carapace scavenger. You have received a memory, azure blade. Opening square bracket ... Your shadow grows stronger." Hugo pulled the trident away from its body violently, before looking at Sunny, who was gasping for air. "Did you get anything?" Sunny nodded. "I got a memory." He stopped for a moment, looking into the air, which made Hugo realize he was reading its runes. "Well, I hope he got something good," he thought before looking at the abomination body. "Should I?" He looked at the crab-like creature unsure if he should imprint it. Some weeks ago he would have imprinted it instantly, but now after some thinking last night, he was not sure anymore. He had 10 essence imprint slots and he currently has 3 transformations, one as a support, one as a tank and the other as a perfect underwater combatant, which were all good for now, but he did not know if he would be able to replace an imprint once it's imprinted, meaning the 10 imprints he receives now could be the only creatures he could transform into before he awakens. The current crab creature did not offer anything that his Vilgax form did not. In fact, his Vilgax form was better in the sense that it was more humanioid. Eventually Hugo decided not to imprint it, saving the remaining 7 slots for more powerful creatures. Although he still took the soul shard inside, he was about to crush it and absorb it, but then he looked at Sunny and hesitate for a moment, which was a bit bizarre considering his current persona disliked hesitation. Quote, "You killed it, it's yours." He extended the shard towards Sunny, who had summoned a weapon, likely the blade he got from the Crete. Sunny however shook his head. "Keep it, I got a memory so I'm not too concerned, besides you're the main damage dealer between the two of us, so naturally it would make more sense if you strengthen yourself more than me." Quote. Hugo once again found no flaw in Sunny's silver tongue, yet he still felt like the shadow was not telling him the entire truth. A soul shard is a soul shard, he reminded himself, deciding becoming as paranoid as Sunny was not his ideal character. Hugo crushed the shard, bringing his soul shard counter to a measly 4/1000. After their first real fight as a duo, Sunny and Hugo, who was still transformed, walked through the labyrinth intending to advance a little bit before they returned to the statue. Sunny was using his shadow to scout while Hugo kept his focus, utilizing his sharp instincts to detect anything that slips past Sunny. Their morals was far better than they were yesterday, considering they managed to take down an awakened beast without any injuries. More importantly, they both now possessed weapons of the awakened rank, which increased their chances of survival. Suddenly Sunny stopped in his tracks, causing Hugo to halt behind him. The treacherous shadow had a shocked expression on his face as he had just seen the most repulsing creature. Hugo tensed slightly before asking, "What is it?" Sunny turned towards him with a petrified expression. "Other sleepers. Girls." Hugo looked at him strangely before thinking, is this fool a misogynist as well? In this day and age? A shadow, a star, an oracle and a shapeshifter. Chapter 23. A shadow, a star, an oracle and a shapeshifter. Hugo looked down at Sunny from his towering height, then extended a single finge, which was the size of Sunny's entire body, and poked him slightly, snapping him out of his bewildered state. "Focus. I know you might have a thing against women, but this is the dream realm. We need to band together to survive." Sunny looked up at Hugo with a horrified expression. "What? Who said I have anything against women? I don't. Matter of fact, I love women. They're very..." He trailed off before stopping himself. Hugo tilted his massive tentacled head, a gesture that was somehow both quizzical and terrifying. "They're what? Lesser? That's quite disappointing. I expected more from you, Sunless. Gods, just shut up. I don't have a thing against women, and this conversation is meaningless. Let's just focus on the main problem here and try to communicate with the other sleepers." Hugo felt a strange, primal urge to kick the tiny creature that was giving him orders, but he suppressed it and simply nodded. "All right, you should get back to normal or else they'd be terrified of you." Hugo remained silent for a moment before scratching his tentacles awkwardly. "About that, I sort of can't transform until a timer ends." Sunny sighed, the sound like a tiny whistle to Hugo's enhanced hearing. "Well, that's going to be a problem, so just wait here. I'll go talk to them, then you should come out when I tell you to." Hugo nodded, though he didn't appreciate being treated like a pet. He simply sat on the ground, staring at nothing in particular as Sunny went to reveal himself to the sleepers his shadow had spotted. "Maybe I should consider using less monstrous imprints in the future," he thought, contemplating the social complications of his aspect. "Nonsense," he muttered to himself, a low rumble. Anything less than perfection wouldn't do this form any justice. He raised his eyes pridefully. After a couple of minutes, he heard Sunny's voice. "Hey, you can come out now." Sunny's voice was a little muffled to avoid drawing any abominations. Hugo got up and walked in that direction, finding Sunny standing next to 2 girls. The first was tall and lithe with silky silver hair and clear, gray eyes. Her revealing clothes were crudely made from black seaweed, leaving her fair skin and athletic build exposed. She was poised, alert, and barefoot. The second girl was the complete opposite, delicate and fragile, with blonde hair and cerulean, aimless eyes. She was dressed in a simple tunic with leather sandals on her feet and a cloak the color of sea waves draped around her shoulders. He recognized both of them. The tall, lithe girl was none other Nephis of the immortal Flame clan, Changing Star. While the second girl was Cassia, the blind girl he had thought was doomed to die the moment she entered the dream realm. Guess I was wrong. Changing Star's eyes locked onto Hugo's towering figure, assessing him coolly before speaking in a calm tone. You are the paragon of purity, correct? Hugo nodded, a slow, heavy motion. That I am, Changing Star, I presume, he said before turning his head into Cassie, and Cassia, I'm glad you're well and alive. His voice came out as a ragged, terrifying rumble making the blind girl shiver slightly. Excuse me, but do I know you? Cassia asked, hesitant. Ah, right, I'm Hugo. I was the second person sitting with you in the academy. I understand why you'd be confused, considering my ability changes my voice and physical appearance. And also his entire personality, but they didn't need to know that. Cassia's face lit up slightly. Ah, right, I'm glad you're alive too. Hugo took a step closer, which made Changing Star tense slightly. Are all of these people racist? He shouted internally, gritting his teeth and looking at Sunny. So, what now? Sunny crossed his arms. Well, remember that massive hill we saw earlier? Maybe we should go there. Cassia smiled a little at the mention of the hill. Actually, we spent the last few days on that hill. We were just about to go back. Sunny seemed to lick his lips a little, a gesture that disgusted Hugo quite a bit. Well, can we come with you? Nephis looked at the odd pair with a neutral expression before speaking in a cold tone. No. She's racist, Hugo thought, suddenly feeling the urge to swing his trident at her. Problem, Nephis finished. She's not racist. He lowered his trident slightly, a bit disappointed for some strange reason. Sunny smiled hesitantly, feeling the awkwardness in the air. Well, all right then. They spent a couple of minutes walking towards the hill. It seemed Nephis had already memorized the paths, which was a great help. Hugo's Omnitrix timed out just as they reached the hill's base, which was incredibly convenient as climbing a hill while being a 15-foot giant wouldn't have been a pleasant experience. So, carefully, they used a rope, one of Nephis's memories, and began their ascent, pulling Cassia up with them. The blind girl's inability to do anything by herself was a difficult predicament and would likely hinder them in combat, but Hugo wasn't keen on voicing his thoughts in front of the two girls. After reaching the top, Hugo glanced at Sunny, who was discussing various things with Nephis and Cassia, such as sharing food and water, the carapace scavengers' movements, and what Sunny and he had seen during their first night here. Hugo didn't have much to add, so he remained silent even as they all sat down and cooked the food they shared. Ah, water, what a luxury, he thought as he drank greedily from Cassie's memory. When they finished their meal, the dark sea had returned, and the night was upon them once more. Everything was consumed by absolute darkness. That darkness frightened Hugo more than anything, reminding him of his house during long, lonely nights. There was also the fact that he would be utterly helpless if any of the three decided to attack him, especially Sunny, who had shown the ability to see in the darkness. It seemed Sunny and Nephis were having similar thoughts as none of them spoke. Suddenly, Cassia broke the silence with a bright voice. How about we formally introduce ourselves? I'm Cassie. Neph, Changing Star's voice reverberated through the darkness. Then Sunny, who was next to him, spoke. I'm Sunless, but you can call me Sunny. Lastly, it was Hugo's turn. I'm Hugo, he said calmly. Strangely enough, Hugo felt a bit out of place in this group. They all seemed so interesting, while he was quite the boring person. I guess I didn't really develop much of a personality. Unaware of his thoughts, Sunny spoke again. Since we're going to be depending on each other, should we share what abilities and memories we have at our disposal? Hugo flinched, his eyes locking onto the spot where Sunny's voice had come from. It was a reasonable question, but the boy hadn't bothered to ask him anything about his abilities during their first night together, so Hugo was a little baffled. What surprised him even more was that Sunny was the first to reveal his cards. I'll start. My attributes give me an affinity to shadows. I also have a slight affiliation to divinity. Lastly, I am prone to finding myself in unlikely situations. He is telling the truth. Not that we doubted your honesty. Cassie said. Really, that's good to know. But, why are you so sure that I am being honest? Oh, that's my ability. I can see people's attributes. Sometimes, I also receive visions. They can be about the future or the past. I mean, that's what I think. It only happened a couple of times. A seer, then, and I thought she couldn't get any creepier. Hugo thought, feeling a strange unease around the seemingly harmless girl. He found himself lost in thought as the conversation progressed until one particular line brought him back. Have you ever used your ability in the academy? Changing Star asked the shadow, clearly indicating he had done something scandalous with his ability. Oh, so a racist, a misogynist, and a pervert. This guy is an entire package deal. In the academy, sure, of course, why? Sunny spoke before widening his eyes in horror. At least, that's what Hugo imagined in the dark. But I have never used it to do anything improper. You have to believe me. Sunny went on to explain why he was innocent and how he didn't use his ability for anything improper because he was too busy learning how to survive. Sunny continued, anyway, that's my ability. As for memories, I have 3. One is an armor, one is a sword, and the last one is a really loud bell. Now it was Nephus's turn. My attributes give me an affinity to light and fire, as well as a strong affiliation to divinity. I have 2 memories, a rope and a sword. The rope is very sturdy and can change its length. The sword is very sharp and can protect its wielder against soul attacks, to a certain extent. My ability can be used to heal. A healer, that's great, Hugo thought with a bit of enthusiasm. It's my turn, Cassie said hesitantly. My attributes are nothing special. I guess I have an affinity to revelations and fate. My ability is like I told you before. It's not very useful. About my memories, I have 3, the bottle, the wooden staff, and this armor. You already know about the bottle. The staff can create wind. The armor is actually of the awakened rank, Neph gave it to me when we met. It has a very powerful protective charm. The fact that Changing Star had been benevolent enough to give such a powerful memory to the blind girl was strange to Hugo. While some people were kind, Nephis didn't strike him as a saint, both literally and figuratively, so he made a note to keep track of that. Understanding his companion's characters was definitely necessary. Finally, the trio went silent, awaiting their 4th, mysterious member to speak up. Hugo sighed, unsure how much he was willing to share. My attributes are a bit strange. I have 6 in total, each changing my body, shadow, and soul to a different extent. One of these attributes allows me to have perfect memory and an immunity to mind attacks that I'm still not sure how it works. He didn't see it, but he could feel Changing Star and Sunny both turn their attention to Cassie. He's telling the truth, the girl said. She must have been particularly confused by his soul-bound attribute, which had traits in it, but she said nothing for the moment. My aspect, as you might have guessed already, allows me to transform into certain creatures for around 10 minutes. Hugo suddenly went silent, debating whether he should tell them the true extent of his aspect. There's also more than one transformation if you're wondering, he added, not sharing the fact there was a recharge time between each transformation or the fact he can scan almost any creature that isn't a human. As for my memories, I have a charm that makes me stronger, a trident that muffles my presence and can also create vortexes, and there's a compass which can guide me to anything I think about, but its range is weak considering it's of the dormant rank. Then there's a spyglass memory that's decent for scouting in. Suddenly a voice cut him off. There's still more. Just how many memories do you have? Sunny's annoyed voice rang out through the darkness, making Hugo a bit agitated. Well, more memories than you, Hugo retorted. The shadow user fell silent before snarling in frustration. As I was saying, Hugo continued, I also have 2 armors. He decided to leave polymorphic crystal out of the conversation for now. Then it was Changing Star who spoke, her voice tinged with interest. You said you have 2 armor memories, correct? He nodded, though the gesture felt stupid in the pitch black. Yes. Changing Star remained silent for a moment before speaking. Is there any way we can make a deal? I would like one of the armors. Hugo remained silent for a moment. In truth, he could just give it to her considering they were now teammates, which would increase their chances of survival. Their WZS, also the FZCT Thay, Chitinous Corpus, was useless to him being of the dormant rank. But getting a deal would certainly be nice. Yes, although I'd warn you, the memory is of the dormant rank and has only 1 enchantment. That doesn't matter. It's better than nothing, she said, her voice as calm as ever. So, What do you want in exchange for it? Well, do you have soul shards? No, but I will have some once we hunt tomorrow. Then how about you give me 3 soul shards, and I give the armor to you now? Changing Star was silent for a bit, thinking about the offer, before sighing. Deal. Alright, I can't really see you, so can you come closer? He suddenly felt someone facing him. He touched her hand slightly, it was colder than stone. You have lost a memory. The spell's voice rang out as he transferred the memory to her. Instantly, Nephi summoned the armor. A white shower of sparks adorned her figure as the dark, chitinous carapace materialized. It contrasted against her silver hair but gave her a slightly more terrifying aura. Thank you, Changing Star said before returning to her spot next to Cassie in silence. Sunny once again broke the silence. Well, it seems we have more than enough to survive. Cassie as a seer is incredibly useful for warning us of danger through her visions, Nephi's as a healer and Hugo is extremely versatile especially as a damage dealer, while I can be a scout. This is a perfect lineup if you ask me. Silence. Sunny sighed, his disappointment practically vibrating through the air. Well, I think we should go to sleep. It's late. Alright, I'll take the first watch, said Nephi's. Sunny retorted, actually, my shadow doesn't sleep. It can wake us up if something happens. Changing Star spoke again, her tone impassive. I'll take the first watch. He stopped arguing, clearly finding it impossible to reason with Changing Star. Sunny and Cassie then went to sleep in their own separate spots, while Nephi simply remained seated where she was. Hugo followed the shadow in the oracle's lead and settled into a sleeping position. Should I try hunting in the sea again? A crazy idea ran through his head, tempting him with the potential of scanning more creatures and acquiring memories or even an echo. No, that would be dangerous, and stupid. Besides, I've already got an aquatic imprint that's incredibly fast, so it's not worth it. There was also the problem of the transformation timer, which was limited to 10 minutes. One slight miscalculation and Hugo would find himself trapped in a sea filled with harrowing abominations. So he simply decided to sleep, pushing all thoughts away as he peacefully drifted into the embrace of slumber. In the morning, Sunny and Nephi's were the first to get up, finding Hugo swinging his trident some distance away while the sun was rising and the sea was retreating. They made a fire and began preparing a simple breakfast. With Cassia still asleep, they did not talk to each other much. It was as if the previous night's conversation had never happened. However, after some time, they somehow ended up discussing the plan for the next few days. Nephi's had some ideas. With what you told us about scavengers crowding to the west, the logical step would be to start moving east as soon as we can. Of course, north and south are also acceptable, but that won't put as much space between us and the enemy. Sunny nodded, agreeing with that logic. We have explored to the east a little, but not enough to confidently make it to the next high point in a day. That's why the best course of action would be to spend today scouting a path to that group of cliffs over there and move the camp tomorrow. Hugo, who had been quietly listening while checking the heart compass, finally spoke up. East makes sense. Whenever I think of danger it points towards west, so it's definitely a bad idea. Sunny sighed. Well, that aside, do you have any idea where we are? Would there be a human citadel to the east? Nephi's shook her head. I've never heard of a region that fits the characteristics of this place. In any case, we have to move to find out more. We'll either find a citadel, encounter an unconquered gateway, or die. East is as good of a direction as any. Plus, it's the safest, because there's a horde of monsters to the west. Hugo looked at the two with a hesitant expression, knowing full well they were fooling each other. The truth was grim and clear. This was an undiscovered region of the dream realm. At that point, Cassie suddenly sat up straight. Her eyes were wide open, and her face was a little pale. She looked both nervous and excited. Nephi's frowned. Cassie, what's the matter? The blind girl turned to them and smiled. A vision. I had a vision. Please don't be something horrible. Hugo grimaced, his hands clutching his compass slightly. Meanwhile, Changing Star stretched her hand, as though prepared to summon her sword. Are we in danger? Cassie energetically shook her head. No, it's not that. People, I saw a castle full of people. She smiled and pointed with her finger. I don't know how far it is, but I'm sure that it's in that direction. Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other, not knowing whether to be glad or petrified. Hugo watched them, a skeptical frown forming on his face. Cassie's small, delicate finger was confidently pointing west. Monster. Chapter 24. Monster. After a short conversation with Cassie, the cohort decided on leaving the hill, carefully retracing their steps from yesterday with the help of Sunny's shadow. The mood was oddly grim through the entire walk, with neither Neffy's nor Cassie speaking to each other. That left only Hugo and Sunny, who were also unfriendly, to say the least. Suddenly, Sunny froze and quickly turned his head to the trio behind him. Halt! His voice was a shout, but it was muffled as well. There are scavengers on the path ahead, 6 of them. They're slowly moving in our direction. Neffy's cast a gaze forward. There was a calculating look on her face. They're done with the carcass. No, I don't think so. But maybe there's not enough meat for everyone anymore, so some stragglers had no choice but to leave with an empty stomach. Neffy's nodded and gestured to a nearby branching path. We'll circle around them. Hugo looked at 2 slightly before summoning the emerald spyglass and observing the scavengers with a strange expression on his face. I can take them. The trio looked at him with a petrified expression on their faces, even the aloof changing star showed a reaction. Are you crazy? Sunny retorted instantly. No, not really, but I said I can take them. I know what you said. But how exactly do you plan on killing all of them? Even when you were transformed you barely held off one of them the last time. Hugo looked at Sunny, then at Changing Star, then back to Sunny. Sunny, last time I was in a rush to protect you from being sliced in half and it was a new creature I was against. Now they aren't, as I've perfectly memorized their moveset. There's also the fact that in terms of strength, I'm superior to all of them. His voice was steady and firm. Besides, you 2 can help me. I can take out one of them through a surprise attack, then deal with the others with your help. Sunny still looked unconvinced, his sharp gaze never leaving Hugo. However, before he could argue more, it was Changing Star who spoke. Newt. Aren't you overestimating yourself? These are awakened beasts, after all. Hugo looked at her for a long minute unsure how to answer. How was he supposed to explain that he, too, was on the same rank and class when transformed without revealing too much? While it may not seem like it, my transformation grants me more than just raw strength. It enhances my reflexes tenfold, and my charm is also an augmentation type. I'm powerful enough to take these scavengers head on. And even if that's not the case and things go south, I can guarantee that I'll be able to hold them off long enough for you 2 to escape. Neffy's looked at him strangely, a mix of unease and suspicion on her face, before she finally nodded. It's worth a try. Sunny's eyes widened, looking at her with a betrayed expression. Hey, I never agreed to any of this. Hugo looked at his shadowy companion before adding with a smile, and you don't have to. But I'd greatly appreciate it if you did. After all, I saved your life twice by now. Did you just blackmail me? Hugo's smile widened. Life is a matter of perspectives, Sunny. Look at it however you want, but it'll be pretty sad if you don't agree to help me and I die because of that. The pale boy gritted his teeth, muttering something about how they were all insane. Fine, you crazy bastard, what's the plan? Neffy's crouched slightly next to Sunny. We can leave Cassie here safely hidden while we 3 engage. First, Hugo would draw their attention by attacking them head on. Then, while they're distracted, we can pick them off one by one. She looked at Hugo before adding, are you truly confident in your ability to take down one of them through a surprise attack? Hugo nodded. My memory is incredibly powerful, and I have a way of making you 2 completely invisible, sort of. You just need to wait for a signal. Neffy's nodded. Alright, wait. No cool last line. Lame. Sunny and Hugo thought in unison. Near a gigantic carcass, 6 harrowing carapace scavengers were feasting off a dead abomination, their chitinous mouths devouring the flesh greedily while contending against each other, ripping apart parts of their own bodies to get more flesh. The sight was revolting and terrifying, showing the profanity of the nightmarish creatures. But that profanity was not meant to last, as a certain figure descended from the sky like a divine judgment. The figure was a 15-foot tall, tentacled giant wielding a mighty trident. That trident was currently facing down, its 4 sharp edges like teeth waiting to devour the abominations. Hugo crashed on top of one of the scavengers, having saturated himself with essence to leap incredibly high from the sky, while the silent stalker enchantment had kept him relatively hidden. The carapace scavenger instantly crumbled against the force and weight of Hugo and his trident, immediately getting flattened to the ground. You have slain an awakened beast, carapace scavenger. The other scavengers reeled from the impact, instantly turning to face the non-corrupted attacker. But Hugo never gave them the chance to retaliate. With the polymorphic crystal upgrading the Black Pearl Trident to the ascended rank, he activated the Vortex enchantment. All hell broke loose. The liquids and fluids in the air and these left over by the Dark Sea were forcefully pulled out by the Trident, making them spin into a small hurricane. But of course, that hurricane was of the ascended rank, sending the scavengers flying through the sky violently. Nephis' paw. Nephis and Sunny watched from the shadows as a gigantic figure hit the ground and crushed a scavenger entirely. Changing Star calculating eyes took in every inch of the scene as she saw how effortlessly the monster shifter killed an awakened beast. Just who the hell is he? It really did not make sense. He was one of only 3 people in history to gain a true name during their first nightmare. The first 2 had been Nephis' mother and Nephis herself, but both of them had come from a renowned legacy clan with incredible training, and Nephis herself had been tampered with like steel through surviving countless assassination attempts sent by the sovereigns. The Paragon of Purity, on the other hand, had come out of nowhere, with no notable background, and shook the entire academy in merely 3 weeks, perhaps even catching the attention of one of the great clans considering they kept watch on aspiring young talents. There was also the possibility that he might possess a divine aspect which did not escape Nephis' attention. While she herself was insanely powerful, the aspect Hugo possessed was beyond ridiculous. His transformation allowed him to go toe-to-toe with a seasoned awakened and even overpower him in terms of raw strength. Not only that, but according to Sunny, he had more than one transformation, which further certified Nephis' suspicion. Could he have been sent by the great clans? She frowned, trying to imagine herself besting a monster who could change between a myriad of transformations. That imagination was not pretty, but of course, that was not going to stop Nephis. She was Changing Star, after all, the last heir of the immortal Flame clan. If she willed it, then who dared to stop her? Besides, a fight with Hugo could easily be avoided if he wasn't who Nephis suspected he was. She turned to Sunny, who was practically invisible in the shadows. He, too, radiated a strange feeling. Nephis felt as if the boy wasn't at all what he seemed. Even when compared to Hugo, he seemed like the most dangerous one. Perhaps even more dangerous than her. What a terrifying bunch I came across. Just as she thought that, she saw a gigantic vortex of water happen where Hugo was attacking the scavengers. She recognized it instantly. That was the signal. She looked at Sunny once again, who in turn met her gaze. They both nodded at each other, understanding what to do. Right as the vortex ended, revealing the bewildered mess of carapace scavengers, Sunny and Nephis descended upon them with terrifying speed. Sunny's shadow slid into his body, encasing him in complete darkness. Instantly, his power doubled as he rushed past Nephis and jumped towards a scavenger that was flipped onto its back. In the last moment, his shadow detached from his body and slid into his blade, further augmenting it. The blade effortlessly sliced through the scavenger's head, killing it on the spot. Nephis only had moments to watch as she rushed towards another scavenger, wisps of white flame igniting in her eyes as she went to attack one of the scavenger's injured limbs. Screech! A sickening groan reverberated as Changing Star drove her blade through the scavenger, injuring it mortally but not quite killing it yet. On the other side, the Paragon of Purity unleashed his harrowing power upon the crab-like abominations, swinging his trident like a herald of death. The 2 scavengers that attempted to overwhelm him through numbers did so to no avail. He perfectly dodged each of their strikes with agility impossible for his size, and even the attacks that landed did not do much damage against the giant monster. Sunny, on the other hand, moved towards the scavenger Nephis was fighting, striking it from the shadows. The scavenger reeled from the impact, turning its attention towards the shadow. That was its biggest mistake. Nephis' eyes ignited in furious white light as her entire body was augmented by soul flame. Of course, that also triggered her flaw, making her feel the pain of being burnt alive on the spot, but she bore with it. She rushed forward and with a surge of incredible strength, thrust her sword into the scavenger's distracted back. Then she grabbed the hilt firmly and ran to the other side, driving her blade through the scavenger body and opening up the entirety of its back. The insides of the abomination spilled out in a disgusting mess of flesh and blood, but Changing Star did not stop. She sent her soul flame towards her blade, cooking the scavenger alive as her furious white flame devoured its soul and body. In moments, Neffys heard the sweet voice of the spell that she despised more than anything in this world. You have slain an awakened beast, carapace scavenger. Your soul shines brighter. Neffys gasped for air as she pulled out her blade, feeling the huge amount of soul fragments entering her soul due to her innate ability. The pain, paired with the remnant of her flaw, was almost unbearable, making her fall to her knees while using her sword to support herself. The Paragon of Purity had finished one of the scavengers and was currently in the process of killing the second, making Neffys question if he was even human. What a monster! However, in that moment of pain, Neffys suddenly had a dreadful realization. 1, 2, 3. She counted the scavengers, clearly remembering there were 6 of them when they decided to begin their attack. Her head jerked around at the last moment, her eyes widening as she saw a giant pincer coming down at her. Sunny's POV. Sunny watched as Changing Star cooked the abomination alive, her white flames destroying the scavenger as if the heat of the sun itself had descended upon the vile nightmare creature. Could be used to heal, my ass, Sunny thought bitterly, as he watched Changing Star suddenly fall to her knees, wincing in pain. Is that her, Florida? Before he could even finish the thought, Sunny's eyes widened as he saw another scavenger launch at Changing Star from behind, approaching with terrible speed. Shit, he thought, looking at Hugo, who was too far away to do anything, then back at the defenseless Changing Star. His body moved on its own, sliding through the shadows as his own enveloped him. The scavenger's pincer descended upon Neffys, threatening to crush her entire body. But thankfully, the Legacy Princess was not going to sit idly and let that happen. Instead, she spun around, barely avoiding the attack within a hair's breadth. The pincer slid past her arm, injuring it slightly as her memory armor was ripped. The scavenger moved to attack once again, but the treacherous Lost from Light was already upon it. Leaping off the ground, Sunny clung to the scavenger like a parasite, driving his blade into its head over and over again. Yet somehow, the carapace creature did not die instantly, as it was not injured like the rest of its vile siblings. Shit, just die already, you bastard, he snarled, burying the sword deep within its skull, but the scavenger still did not relent, resisting until the end. That was when Sunny sensed another shadow approaching, a shadow that was vast and strange, a shadow that was unwelcomed by other shadows. Something slammed into the carapace scavenger as it was trying to swat Sunny away from it. It was Hugo, who shoulder bumped the abomination in his terrifying form, sending it flying through the coral. Of course, Sunny was still on top of it, but he still managed to use the last ounce of his strength to remove his blade and jump off. At the same time, the spell credited him for the kill. You have slain an awakened beast, carapace scavenger. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received an echo. Sunny rolled on the ground, his limbs feeling numb and hurt. He shot his head upward, piercing Hugo with a menacing gaze. You asshole, I was right there, screamed Sunny. Hugo, on the other hand, tilted his tentacled head, his expression harsh and unchanging. You jumped, didn't you? And you're not terribly hurt, so it's fine. The cold words hit Sunny instantly. He had known Hugo did not have the best of characters, but blatantly disregarding his safety like that was just too much. He grimaced. What if I didn't react on time next time? The Paragon of Purity's eyes narrowed as he looked at the shadow. Then you die. Sunny gritted his teeth, a cold, unrelenting seed of hatred blooming within his heart. Just wait, you bastard. Hugo's POV. Hugo took in the state of his companions. One was battered and the other was reeling on the ground. Surprisingly, instead of feeling guilt at risking his companions' lives like that, he simply felt disappointment by their performance. They were too weak, too soft, too human. The disregard for Sunny's safety did make him feel a bit of guilt, but his pride as a chimera sui generis would never allow him to apologize, so he simply swept it under the rug. He's overreacting anyway. He still owes me his life, Hugo thought bitterly as he crushed the soul shards from the 3 abominations he killed, raising his soul fragments counter to 10 1,000ths, which was a little infuriating, but there was nothing he could do about it at the moment. Unless, Hugo walked towards the corpse of the scavenger Neffys killed and pulled out the soul shard from it. Sunny and Neffys got up and fixed themselves as they watched him take the soul shard and crush it in his palm. 12 1,000ths. It was within his deal with Neffys as she still owned him 3 shards, but Sunny still gave him a dark look while Changing Star simply shrugged as she went to extract the meat from the scavengers. At that moment, Hugo heard a beeping sound coming from his chest. The Omnitrix flared red as he transformed back to his human form in flash of red light. He scoffed a little, feeling the weakness and fragility of his dormant form returning. Guys, Sunny said on the way back to where Cassie was hidden, making them stop, fearing they were against another abomination. What is it? Hugo said, feeling a bit guilty about his earlier treatment of Sunny. Sunny simply ignored him and looked at Changing Star. I got an echo. Her eyes widened in shock. An echo was an incredible resource to have in the dream realm, one of an awakened beast, no less. That's great, Neffys muttered, a strange look on her face as they reached the place Cassie was hidden in. Hugo turned to Sunny and said in a calm voice, "Congratulations." Sunny shot him a side glance before rolling his eyes in annoyance before saying, "Whatever." Hugo's shoulders slumped a little as he mentally sighed, "I deserve it. Stupid flaw." Later during the day, they repeated the same process when taking down a group of 3 scavengers, hiding Cassie, sending Hugo to attack first, and then Sunny and Neffys would join the battle. Now armed with Sunny's echo, the process was even easier than ever, not that it had gone on for that long, although that did not mean it wasn't exhausting. Especially for Hugo, who began to develop a strange mental fatigue from transforming and transforming constantly. Who would have guessed that constantly shifting your soul and body would be bad for you? Currently, they were waiting on the edge of the labyrinth path leading directly to the giant statue of the Headless Knight. There was a group of scavengers blocking their path that did not stand much of a chance. The sunset was near, but they still had time. Helping Cassie along, Sunny followed Changing Star and quickly traversed the open space between the labyrinth and the statue. Now, they only had to get on top of it, which was incredibly infuriating because of Cassie's inability. I should stop thinking like that, he grimaced, feeling a mix of disgust and hatred for himself. Hugo, being the one who was less exhausted physically, carried Cassie the most during the climb, switching between Sunny and Neffys when he got too tired. I really should work on getting a flying imprint. They had finally reached the top. Not long after, the dark sea returned, flooding the world in complete darkness. The cohort couldn't risk making a fire to cook the food, so they simply ate the food dry, drinking water to pass it. This is disgusting, Hugo grimaced, forcing himself to chew on the meat. After that, Sunny and Neffys split the rewards between them, with Neffys giving him the remaining 2 soul shards, sealing their dia. Hugo felt guilty because of that, but he still didn't refuse the shards, bringing his soul shards total to 16 1,000ths. It was then that Sunny did something bizarre, again, and gave his shard to Neffys. Don't tell me he's feeling guilty for her, Hugo thought, wondering if the paranoid boy could actually feel that type of emotion. He was then proven correct as Sunny explained why it was strategically better if Neffys got the shards. And he also made a deal with her to train him, which made perfect sense for someone like Sunny who came from the outskirts. Hugo found the idea quite interesting, as receiving tutelage from a legacy princess was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but alas, his main weapon was a spear trident while Neffys and Sunny used swords. It was currently the middle of the night, Cassie was asleep, Sunny was swinging his sword, and Neffys was taking guard. And Hugo found himself feeling incredibly bored while also being unable to sleep. So he did the only thing he can to pass the time. He brought out his spell runes, mainly focusing on his Aspect Legacy. Aspect Legacy, the Last Testament. Aspect Legacy description. I, the first thinker, have foreseen the end and could not stop it. And so, I leave this record. Let this stand as my testament against the vile strings of fate and the one who weaved them. Within this record lies the proof of our world and the hope for what may one day be again. You who are reading this is the testament of our existence. So I beg of you, whoever you are, do not fail us. First playlist. Locked. Second playlist. Locked. Third playlist. Locked. Fourth playlist. Locked. Fifth playlist. Locked. Sixth playlist. Locked. Seventh playlist. Locked. He had long contemplated what his Aspect Legacy was supposed to offer him in terms of power, eventually reaching the conclusion that it was most likely going to be a unique imprint. But that left one important question. Just what do I do to unlock it? He looked at the shimmering runes, trying to find anything that could lead him to unlocking the first playlist. Of course that too lead to nowhere. Eventually, he sighed, deciding to enter his soul sea. The gigantic blue maze appeared in front of him, making Hugo shiver slightly as he remembered the sight of the hundreds of imprints looking at him from that vision back in the academy. Maybe I could find them, Hugo said, walking through the complicated maze. The place was utterly enormous, spanning over dozens of turns and hundreds of walls, each inscribed with strange lines similar to the ones the Galvans had in their tech. Just what is this place? Hugo traced his hand on the walls, feeling a strange amount of energy coursing through it. That same energy was familiar, resenting with something deep within his soul. It was Omni energy. He couldn't quite manipulate that energy, but he could feel it. And currently it was concentrated in a single spot, as if it was trying to lead Hugo somewhere. Taking the right turns and paths, Hugo continued forward, his expression hardening slightly as his senses were alerting him of something. Taking one last turn, Hugo came across something new. Instead of the countless turns and paths of the maze, there's a desolate space in his soul sea, and in the middle of that space was a singular object that was not supposed to be there. It was a door. He really enjoyed writing this chapter. It was a bit hard, but I did it. Thanks for all the support. I really appreciate how chill the community is. Aspect. Cliffhanger. Rank. Corruption. Chapter 25. Corruption. Hugo froze, blinking several times to confirm that he was not seeing things. A door. It's a fucking door. The sheer absurdity of it was staggering. A door, here in the sanctum of his own soul sea. Divine aspect or not, it was ridiculous. The door itself was strange. It was forged from a smooth, gray metallic material which was featureless save for a complex locking mechanism that spanned its center. Etched into the lock, clear and unmistakable, was the symbol of the Omnitrix. However, the most bewildering part was that it led nowhere. It simply stood alone in the blue vastness, a definitive object in the middle of the maze. Hugo approached cautiously, his curiosity getting the better of him. He pressed a hand against its cool, unyielding surface. Nothing happened. He tried pushing it, then shoving it with his shoulder. He ran his fingers over the lock, searching for a keyhole or a mechanism, but finding none. He even delivered a frustrated kick, the impact sending a dull thud echoing through the silent expanse. Nothing worked. Just what the spell is this? He muttered, frowning at his own choice of words. His eyes dropped to his arm, to the Omnitrix nestled there. The hourglass symbol was glowing brighter and more intensely than he had ever seen it, pulsing with a light that felt like the relic would explode at any moment. It doesn't usually do that. His frown deepened into confusion. Then, without any warning, an invisible force seized him, violent and absolute. The Omnitrix itself seemed to latch onto the door, magnetically pulling his entire body forward with it. His arm, which was bonded with the device, slammed flat against the locked surface. A wave of energy, pure, potent Omni energy, spasmed from the core of the watch and poured into the door. The transfer was instantaneous over as soon as it began. The magnetic pull weakened before vanishing entirely, leaving Hugo stumbling back, heart hammering against his ribs. Click. The sound was soft and cool, making the intricate lock disengage, its components sliding apart with a series of quiet, precise clicks. The metal of the door didn't swing open, instead it unraveled, folding in on itself to reveal what it had guarded. Inside was not a room but a beautiful, shimmering crack in the very fabric of his soul sea. It was a wound of brilliant blue light which was constantly changing its shape and dimensions, never settling on one form for too long. It was like looking into a colored mirror that reflected nothing but pure energy, and that filled Hugo with an unsettling awe. Do I, or do I not? He circled the phenomenon, noting with a creeping unease that it was perfectly three-dimensional. No matter what angle he viewed it from, it presented a solid surface with no frame or edges. What's the manual for when you find a crack in reality inside your soul sea? Yeah, there was none. After long moments of hesitation, he finally gave in, and with a final steadying breath, Hugo closed his eyes and stepped through. Weirdly, he felt nothing. The lack of sensation was in itself deeply disappointing. Opening his eyes, Hugo found himself in a circular chamber that was achingly familiar in its advanced sterile aesthetic. He recognized it at first sight. It was Galvan tech, reminiscent of the lab from his first nightmare. The floor and ceiling were seamless dark marble adorned with multiple lines that were now blue instead of green. The most striking features were the 10 massive containment pods forming a perfect circle across the room, each one dwarfing him in size. Each of them was filled with a different, slowly shifting liquids that made each one distinct from other One held a bubbling magenta fluid, another a swirling gray gas, and a third a viscous silver liquid. Hugo shivered, a familiar cold dread seeping into his bones as he remembered his own time trapped in a similar pod. The Galvans sure love their pods, he sighed with an annoyed expression on his face before walking over to the pod filled with what looked like molten rock and fire, a churning mix of magma and actual flame. Although there was something strangely wrong about the liquid. Squinting, he peered deeper into the radiant liquid. There, at its heart, he saw it. A tiny, shifting speck of absolute darkness, not the natural absence of light but a physical vile darkness that felt repulsive and wrong in a way he could not explain. It was a seed of pure corruption, and as Hugo stared, he felt it staring back with a sliver of strange malevolence focused solely on him. Hugo took a step back, horrified by the realization that something so vile was nestling within his soul. Just what the hell is that? His breath hitched as he covered his mouth, feeling a wave of nausea twisting his stomach. Then something happened. A voice spoke in his mind with a cold robotic tone that was different from the sweet voice of the spell. Corrupted DNA sample detected. Corruption detected. Purifying corruption. Purification impossible. Failsafe activated. Generating a trial. Wah. Wielder of the Omnitrix. Prepare for your trial. Before Hugo could protest, an unseen force gripped him, yanking him forward. His body phased through the solid pod as if it were mist, with his consciousness blurring and stretching before being violently ripped from his soul sea. Hugo opened his eyes to absolute nothingness. A void, but not the empty quiet of the dream realm's sky, nor was it the same void filled with a myriad of stars. This was a deeper, more profound emptiness, as if light and darkness had no room to exist in this place. Then, a change happened in the endless static voice. From his left arm, a single point of azure light sprouted. Then, just as it was born, the light grew, its light not only illuminating the void but consuming it, rewriting the nothingness with its own blueprint. In the span of a heartbeat, Hugo found himself standing on a new world. A world of literal fire. Although that fire was not mundane, the world itself was made of a divine, all-consuming flame, threatening to devour anything within it. Volcanoes erupted endlessly, painting the sky in shades of orange and yellow, while rivers of magma carved glowing paths through cracked, obsidian plains. Don't tell me this is a nightmare. He paled, the memory of his first nightmare a fresh scar on his psyche. No, calm down. Surely my aspect can't generate nightmare trials. Right. That would be absurd and above else, not possible. Right. He looked down at himself, realizing that he was naked, yet strangely enough, he felt no heat whatsoever, which made him even more confused. Although that confusion could be answered after he gets himself prepared. Hugo willed his memories into being. Proto-tech armor encased him in a cool, familiar embrace. The black pearl trident materialized in his hand with a comforting weight, and Conqueror's wrath settled around his neck, saturating his body with its enchantments. Hugo let out a shaky breath as he thanked the gods that he still had access to his memories. The Omnitrix was also still on his wrist, though it felt as if the connection between it and him was a bit strained for some odd reason. Then, Hugo suddenly heard movement from behind him. Spinning his head and body, Hugo watched as a figure emerged from the infernal landscape. It was a humanoid creature, its body a framework of dark red, rocky skin struggling to contain a core of bright searing magma. A large flame burned where its head should be, its face replaced by a mask-like face forming within the fire, complete with a lashing, fiery tongue. It was a being of pure, elemental power. But it was wrong. So terribly wrong. The flames that wreathed it, which should have been a brilliant red or orange, were instead the color of the dark sea itself, a deep, profane black. A visible aura of corruption clung to it, putting a stain on its beautiful flames. Hugo had no doubt that the figure was a nightmare creature, and an incredibly powerful one at that. Just my luck. Hugo immediately slammed the Omnitrix dial. A flash of blue light washed over him as his body blurred, shifted and expanded. The transformation into the Chimera sui generis was instantaneous as the familiar, monstrous power flooded his limbs, but then something else happened. His fear didn't just lessen, instead it was completely erased. His racing thoughts, his logical mind, and even his very sanity, they all receded, swallowed by one primal drive. There was the vile creature. And there was a way to kill it. Nothing else mattered. The corrupted fire being shot forward, not running but flying through, propelling itself on jets of black flame. It moved with harrowing speed towards Hugo's giant frame, who barely twisted his massive body to the side, the heat of its passage washing over him. Seizing the opening, he swung his trident aiming to end the battle in one swift strike. But the abomination was faster than him. It leapt back with strange agility, dodging the gigantic trident with ease. Then its arms spread wide open, facing Hugo's direction. From its open palms, the corrupt flames within its body gathered, focused and lastly reconstructed into a single concentrated beam of pure black fire, all in a single moment. There was no time to dodge. The subsonic attack hit him square in the chest, engulfing his gigantic frame in an instant. Agony. That was the only thing he felt at that moment. A profound, soul-deep agony as the dark flames tried to devour him while. It was a pain that rivaled the experiments of his first nightmare, the sensation of his very flesh being cooked alive. But the key word here was almost. Through the torment, he persisted through the flames. His resistance attribute granted by this form was amplified by Heart of Cinders enchantment, created a desperate bulwark against the disintegration. He could resist the flames, yes, but he could not escape it. The sheer velocity of the flame beam pinned him in place, making him feel like a bug under a magnifying glass under a cruel sun. Every second was an eternity of suffering that he could not escape. Well, isn't this just perfect? His mind raced, trying to find anything that could get him out of this situation. But there was none. His skin was already metking, and his memories, while strong, would not last forever against the heat. Memories. Suddenly, a brilliant idea came to his mind. He summoned the polymorphic crystal and poured his essence into it, activating the greed enchantment. Instantly, the tyrannical pressure of the flames lessened as the crystal began to siphon the corrupt fire, treating the devastating energy as just another resource to be consumed. Hugo watched as the crystal glowed, saturated with stolen power, reaching its absolute limit. Now, he triggered its other enchantment, envy. All the stored corrupted energy was converted into a violent blast of kinetic force. Hugo aimed it directly back at his attacker. The crimson energy tore through the ongoing beam. The counter force slammed into the abomination and sent it hurtling backward, cracks immediately appearing across its rocky armor. Hugo didn't wait. He charged, his powerful legs carrying him forward as he merged the crystal with his trident, feeling it ascend in rank. As the creature struggled to rise, its head, or what was supposed to be one, was met with the four sharp teeth of the ascended trident, impaling it with a sickening crunch. But the creature was not so weak-willed. As even with its skull pierced, it fought on, its deformed hands clawing at him, desperate to bring him down. Just die already. Hugo's voice was a guttural roar. He wrenched the trident upward, the abomination's body dangling from the prongs, and slammed it down onto the hard ground with earth-shattering force. Then, he brought his gigantic boot down, crushing and pressing down against the abomination while ignoring the searing heat that radiated from its broken form. The sound of snapping rock and sizzling flesh was a drumbeat to his rage. He discarded the trident, the creature still skewered on it, and then with his bare hands, he grabbed the broken body, one hand on its legs while the other was on its torso, and pulled with all his awakened might. Crack! The abomination's form groaned, then resisted for a single strained moment, and then it gave way under Hugo's harrowing power. Hugo roared as he tore it clean in half. Aha! He didn't stop. The foreign emotions of the body he was inhabiting, its rage, its hate, its primal need to destroy its opponent, consumed him entirely, drowning his own fear and desperation. He threw the separate parts to the ground and fell upon the torso, his mighty fists rising and falling in a relentless, mindless rhythm, pounding it into dust as the earth beneath him shook. Just die, 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 die. He was screaming, begging for the spell's voice, for any sign that it was over. His anger, his hate, his fear, and the alien madness of his form collided, each feeding the other in a vicious cycle, to the point where he was no longer able to determine where his own self begun and where the transformation ended. He was losing himself, his fragile human mind fraying at the edges, being rewritten by the monster he had become. Then, right as his mind reached its breaking point, he heard the same familiar voice that brought him into this hellish place. Corruption purged. DNA sample purified. You have acquired an essence imprint. Wake up, paragon of purity. That name, his true name, was an anchor to his true self that no transformation could touch. It pierced the madness reaching deep within his soul. Paragon of, he whispered, the words dying on his lips as the world of fire crumbled into nothingness. Dash dash dash. Hugo opened his eyes. He was back in the circular chamber, slumped against the cold marble floor. He was human again, the chimera's emotions gone as if they had never been, taking with them the madness that had overwhelmed him. It took him several seconds to orient himself. He was back in front of the pod that held the magma-like liquid. This time, however, it was clear. The seed of corruption was completely gone, purged, leaving the contents pure and radiant. The other 9 pods on the other hand still swirled with their own dark vile seeds. What the hell was that? He muttered, his voice a ragged terror in the silence. He leaned his head back against the wall, his body trembling. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a bone-deep exhaustion and a creeping horror. His mind replayed it, the pain, the rage, the feeling of his sanity slipping away from him, all remaining inside his brain, which was cursed with memory. With that memory came another realization. What he had just experienced wasn't a nightmare. Instead, it was something much worse, something generated by his own soul, his own aspect, in the same manner the nightmare spell did to create a trial with the sole goal of purifying the corruption within the essence imprint. The reality of it crashed down on him. This was what his power entailed, this was his destiny. Not just cool transformations and exciting battles, but this utterly terrifying madness, this violation of his own mind, this endless war against a corruption. And this was only the beginning of it. There was hundreds if not thousands of seeds of corruption within his soul, all nestled within the DNA sample of past noble creatures. Just what the hell is this? He screamed, his voice raw and desperate, echoing in the sterile chamber. His fists clenched, nails digging into his palms and painting them red. The walls of his soul seemed to vibrate with his emotional turmoil. He gasped, his breathing a violent and irregular. Hugo looked down at the Omnitrix, the source of it all. A wave of pure, undiluted revulsion washed over him. "Curse you," he snarled, clawing at the divine relic, trying to pry it from his wrist. But it was futile, like trying to tear off his own soul. "Curse the first thinker, curse this stupid divine aspect, and curse my flaw." He was sobbing now, tears of frustration and fear tracing paths down his cheeks. He was trapped. This power was forever a part of him. There was no abandoning it. "Why?" he whispered, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a weary despair. "Why me? Why couldn't I have gotten a simpler aspect, a normal one?" He cursed the world, the nightmare spell, his first nightmare, the nightmare creatures, the dead gods, and the cruel irony of fate, everything that had led him to this moment of utter powerlessness in a room of unimaginable power within his soul. He couldn't bear it anymore. The weight of it all was simply too immense for his mind, and so he fled, retreating from his own soul sea and closing his eyes tightly and seeking the only escape he had ever truly known since his mother's death. The sweet, gentle and blessedly empty embrace of slumber. Oh, I really enjoyed writing this. But holy shit, it took like 3 hours to finish planning, editing and working on how the mechanic work. So for all these that didn't understand, the Omnitrix work in a similar way to the spell. It creates trial to purge the corruption within the essence imprints. The reasons these essence imprints are corrupted is going to be revealed later. And yes, this has relation to his aspect legacy. Heat Blast. Chapter 26. Heat Blast. Hugo awoke with a heavy head and the gritty feeling of sleep in his eyes. The memories of the previous night's ordeal in his soul sea felt like a fever dream, leaving him with a big amount of unease. Pushing himself off the cold stone, he yawned and walked over to where the others were already gathered around a small fire eating a quiet breakfast. "Good morning," he said, the words feeling awkward and overly loud in the grim silence. Neffys and Sunny stopped their low conversation and looked at him. "Good morning," Neffys replied, her tone as even as ever. "Morning," Sunny added, his voice noticeably cooler. Cassie finished chewing a piece of meat and swallowed before offering a small, strained smile. "Good morning. Am I really that unpleasant to be around?" Hugo mused internally, taking a seat near the fire and helping himself to some of the cooked scavenger meat. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. "Did something happen?" he asked, glancing between their solemn faces. Neffys was the one to answer, her gaze fixed on the dying embers. Cassie had another vision. Hugo sighed, the piece of meat in his hand suddenly feeling less appetizing as he realized the reason behind their sour moods. "Was it that bad?" "Not necessarily, but it was dark, to say the least," Sunny interjected, his voice low. He proceeded to recount the fragmented images from Cassie's vision, a boundless darkness held back by 7 seals beginning to unravel, a human castle drowning in an ocean of flames, a corpse in ornate golden armor sitting eternally on a throne, a warrior woman with a bronze spear fighting a ceaseless horde of abominations, an archer piercing the sky with his arrows. And finally, the part that unsettled Hugo the most, a dying angel being consumed by ravenous shadows, which were in turn devoured by a vile abomination with too many faces. What a mess, Hugo thought, struggling to find a shred of hope in the ominous prophecy. They were trapped in a godforsaken corner of the dream realm surrounded by abominations far stronger than them, and now they had to contend with visions of cosmic doom. On top of it all, he was still reeling from the horrifying discovery within his own soul. His eyes dropped to the Omnitrix on his arm, the cold metal seamlessly fused with his skin. The idea that this relic, the core of his power, was a vault containing hundreds of corrupted genetic templates was horrifying to say the least. He still didn't understand how it was even possible. The Omnitrix was meant to be a testament to lost races, a bastion of purity, yet it was tainted from within. Shaking his head to clear the dark thoughts, he decided to focus on the one potentially positive outcome from yesterday's trial. He brought his hand to the Omnitrix dial, turning it. The familiar holographic display of his imprints appeared. He cycled past the Chimera, the Galvan and the Piscis Volan, his focus settling on the new, fourth figure. It was still just a black silhouette on the dial, but its humanoid shape was unmistakably that of the flaming abomination he had fought. Hugo decided to take a quick look at his runes first. Name: Hugo. True name: Paragon of Purity. Rank: Dreamer. Omni-Core: Dormant. Soul Fragments: 116 1/1000. Memories: Proto-Tech Armor, Polymorphic Crystal, Conqueror's Wrath, Black Pearl Trident, Emerald Spyglass, Heart Compass. Echoes: Aspect: Omnitrix. Rank: Divine. Aspect: Legacy: The Last Testament. First playlist: Locked 10%. Second playlist: Locked. Third playlist: Locked. Fourth playlist: Locked. Fifth playlist: Locked. Sixth playlist: Locked. Seventh playlist: Locked. His eyes narrowed as he took in the runes displaying his soul fragments counter. His soul fragments had jumped from 16 to 116, which was a massive unexplained increase of power. When did I even absorb that much? He was certain it was 16 1/1000 before he slept, so unless Sunny and Nephis had secretly fed him 100 soul shards during his sleep, then this made no sense. Don't tell me it was because of yesterday's trial. The memory of the blazing abomination he killed in the trial resurfaced, but that didn't make sense. Soul fragments were either gained by absorbing shards or by killing other awakened. The latter worked because their human soul cores could resonate and absorb one another. He wasn't the same species as that creature, but his soul was now one with the Omnitrix, a divine relic containing the essence of countless races, so in a way, didn't that make him a part of all of them? Although there was a limite, he was not a part of every creature. His innate ability, Essence Imprint, would not have existed if that was the case, although that didn't make the realization any less astonishing. So, in theory, I can saturate my core by passing these trials, or by killing members of the races contained within the Omnitrix. The implications were staggering to say the least. The Omnitrix truly never ceased to surprise him. His attention was then snagged by the small change in his aspect legacy. The first playlist was now 10% unlocked. 10 pods in that room, clearing one gave me 10% of what I think should be a 100%, so that's the key. I have to purify them all to unlock my first legacy relic. It was a daunting but clear path forward, offering both new imprints and a greater power upon completion. Well, time for my big reward. He focused on the new imprint's data. Fourth imprint: Pyronite. Imprint rank: Awakened. Imprint class: Beast. Imprint description: the sun god's first breath upon his divine realm caused numerous calamities and blessings. Among the greatest of these calamitous events were the Pyronite, beings of pure, eternal, divine flame. Imprint attributes: Telekinesis, minor telekinesis, resistance, blazing spirit. Imprint abilities: Telekinesis description: a Pyronite can control its body temperature. Minor telekinesis description: this imprint can slightly manipulate stone. Resistance description: a Pyronite is immune to fire and extreme heat. Blazing spirit description: a Pyronite's source element is fire. A sudden thought hit Hugo as he read the description: are all noble creatures created by the gods. The spell seemed to include divine, or a god or two every time one of his imprints were mentioned, so it was a safe connection to make. But after all, that could mean nothing considering how humans were probably created by the gods as well. Hugo turned his attention back to attributes, deciding to leave cosmic matters involving the dead gods to some other time. So I can control my temperature, manipulate stone to a small degree, and gain complete immunity to fire and heat. and lastly I grow stronger when I'm near fire. Hugo summarized. The last attribute, blazing spirit, was particularly useful although a bit vague. Source element was something most awakened had, and it was basically what domain their aspects were related to, and within that domain, their aspects and they themselves would be empowered. For example, most awakened of House Knight would have their source element be either water or storm, and within that source element they would gain a tremendous boost to their strength. Ah, thanks Professor Rock and Miss J, he thought, remembering how he bombarded his poor professors with dozens of questions. Hugo stretched slightly, feeling a mix of satisfaction and frustration warred within him. While the attributes were incredibly powerful, the lack of active abilities was a clear limitation of his aspect. The Omnitrix elevated his rank to awakened when transformed, but it didn't change his class from beast, which meant he would never be able to manifest the full potential of a creature like a Pyronite's innate ability to project and shape fire. After all, a human could only form a single soul core. That was a fundamental law every awakened knew. Only nightmare creatures, and presumably the original noble beasts, could possess multiple cores housing different abilities. No matter how changed his soul was, he was still at his foundation, human. He had to be, or else his remaining sanity would instantly crumble. Pushing the dark thoughts away again, Hugo looked up and saw that his companions had dispersed. Neffys and Cassie were speaking in low tones while Sunny was practicing with his sword. It seemed they weren't planning to move out just yet. Getting to his feet, Hugo walked over to Sunny, his steps a bit hesitant. Seeing his approach, the pale boy stopped his drills and fixed Hugo with a cold stare. What? I'm sorry, Hugo began, forcing the words out. For my behavior yesterday, I didn't mean it. I'm also sorry for endangering your life like that, it really wasn't my intention. Sunny's cold eyes swept over him, making Hugo shiver slightly. The shadowy sleeper scoffed before speaking in a barely restrained tone. Whatever, just don't do it again. With that, he turned his back and resumed his training, effectively dismissing Hugo. The paragon of purity had a distinct feeling that Sunny didn't forgive him, but there was nothing more he could do about it. Maybe I should be nicer to him from now on. The thought felt foreign, but the guilt he felt was real. He had been an asshole who almost caused Sunny's death. That said, he wasn't about to reveal his flaw to earn back favor, even if that meant enduring Sunny's resentment. Hugo stood in the center of the platform, a safe distance away from the others. He stared at the Omnitrix, the familiar feelings of anticipation and wariness churning in his gut. Here we go, he exhaled, pulling up the dial and selecting the new Pyronite imprint. He slammed the dial down. A flash of blue light engulfed him as he felt his body being remade in an instant. His skin hardened, transforming into dark red volcanic rock that cracked and glowed from within. His bones and blood melted away, replaced by a churning liquid core of pure magma. His head ignited in a roaring blaze, forming a mane of fire with 2 points of intense light forming where his eyes should be. Where Hugo had stood, a humanoid creature of living rock and divine fire now towered, heat shimmering the air around it. Sunny and Neffys, watching from a distance, their eyes widened in fresh surprise. It was one thing to know he had multiple forms, but it was another to see him shift from a tentacled horror to a walking volcano. Hugo flexed his new hands, clenching and unclenching fists of magmatic rock. He jumped, experimentally surprised by the lightness of the body despite its rocky composition. Now for the tests. He looked inward, reaching for the telekinesis attribute. Instantly, he willed his internal temperature to rise. The glow from the cracks in his rocky skin intensified from a dull red to a brilliant, blinding orange. The air around him warped violently and the stone beneath his feet began to sizzle and melt into a shallow, molten pool. Caught off guard by the intensity of the attribute, he quickly dialed the heat back down to a steady, manageable simmer, not wanting to accidentally melt the entire platform ablaze or injure his companions. Next, he focused on minor telekinesis. He concentrated on the stone beneath him, willing it to move. Nothing. He scratched his fiery head, the motion sending a few sparks flying. Hugo focused harder, pouring more intent into the attribute. This time, a handful of pebbles and a few larger fist-sized rocks trembled, then levitated a few inches off the ground, hovering uncertainly in the air. Well, this is limited, he mused, a bit disappointed despite the attribute possessing the word minor in its name. But then his mind, still sharp despite the form's bestial nature, began to work. Wait, I shouldn't dismiss it just yet. This could be incredibly useful for crafting. Combined with my Galvan form's intellect and runic sorcery, it could make a good combination. A slow, devilish smile stretched across his fiery face. Neat, he rumbled, the sound like shifting gravel in a furnace. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't hear the light footsteps approaching until they were close. He turned to see Neffy standing there, her gray eyes analyzing his new form with a calculating intensity. If you don't mind me asking, she began, her voice as level as ever, how many transformations do you have? Hugo hesitated for a moment, as revealing his hand wasn't inherently dangerous, but a deep-seated caution still made him pause. Finally, he raised 4 burning fingers. 4, for now, but the giant tentacle form and this one are the only ones truly helpful on land. The other 2 are a support form and an aquatic-based form. She nodded slowly, filing the information away. I see. Well, after you're done with whatever this is, come talk with me and Sunny. We need to plan our next move soon. She turned to leave but paused, glancing back over her shoulder. Then, in the same neutral tone that one might use to describe the weather, she added, "This form is cool." And with that, she walked away, leaving Hugo staring at her, his fiery brow raised as he contemplated whether she was making fun of him or making a joke. He looked over at Sunny, who had observed the entire exchange with a look of pure bewilderment on his face. The shadow just shrugged, as if to say, yeah, she's weird like that. What a colorful bunch I've ended up with, Hugo thought, shaking his head before returning to his practic testing how his new rocky body moved with the weight and balance of his trident. After de-transforming, Hugo joined Sunny and Neffy's at the western edge of the platform. They were deep in discussion and the news were quite grim. Sunny's shadow had witnessed 2 new nightmare creatures similar to the carapace scavengers but of a much higher class, monsters, arrived to claim the last of the transcendent soul shards from the giant shark carcass. His shadow had followed their path, which led west, the same destination they were heading for. With the carcass nearly picked clean, the area would soon be swarming with hungry scavengers again, making it impossible for 4 sleepers to survive, let alone travel throughout the labyrinth. And so the trio came to a decision: they would leave the Headless Knight's statue for good tomorrow at first light. While Hugo wasn't overly worried for his own survival on the journey, a strange, nascent sense of responsibility made him feel wary for his companions. It was an unfamiliar feeling, this concern for others he barely knew, but it was this small, flickering ember of camaraderie that led him to do something he normally wouldn't have considered. Sunny's POV. After a brief attempt to lighten Cassie's mood, Sunny found himself battling a profound sense of boredom. With their departure set for tomorrow, there was nothing to do but rest and wait, and while Sunny was a connoisseur of doing nothing, however, he too had his limits. Neffy's on the other hand was a literal social void who couldn't hold a conversation while Cassie was still withdrawn, processing her harrowing vision. That left the crazy shapeshifter with whom he was currently on shaky terms. His shadow, gloomy, seemed to radiate his approval at this state of affairs. "You really don't like that guy, huh?" Sunny muttered, wondering for the umpteenth time if his shadow was genuinely racist against other shadows. He did apologize, but so what? Actions mean more than words, so unless he does something to make up for it, it doesn't count, he thought grimly, although the fact that Hugo saved his life twice was still a fresh memory on his mind, making the situation a bit too complicated. His attention was caught by movement. Hugo had walked to a clear spot on the platform and proceeded to transform into his new, flaming devil, form and then sat down cross-legged. After squinting a little, Sunny realized he wasn't just sitting idle. The small stones and pebbles around him were levitating, trembling in the air as Hugo focused. So he can manipulate stone to a degree, Sunny noted, making sure to keep that on his mind in case a confrontation happened between the two, although the treacherous Lost from Light would be lying if he said he was confident in winning a battle against the paragon of purity. The sheer versatility of the shapeshifter's aspect was both impressive and unsettling. It confirmed a suspicion that had been growing in Sunny's mind since they'd met, a possibility he'd been quietly accounting for. It has to be that. I'm sure of it now. The thought was both intimidating and in a strange way, validating. His aspect is of the divine rank. It was the only thing that made sense. Hugo had gotten a true name from his first nightmare, just like Sunny and Neffy's had. The link between a true name and a divine aspect was something Sunny was still figuring out, but the correlation was undeniable. After all, he was living proof it could happen. He sighed, ruffling through his dark hair. It's like a divine aspect bargain sale out here, he scoffed under his breath, hoping no one heard the bitter joke. When he looked back at Hugo, his jaw went slack for an entirely different reason. The paragon of purity in his terrifying elemental form, was carefully, meticulously, using his control over stone to weave small, levitating rocks into necklaces. Wait, are those necklaces? A dumbfounded expression spread across Sunny's face. Don't tell me he's planning to confess to Nephis or Cassie. Wait, could he be trying to confess to me? The thought was so horrifying that Sunny felt what little color his face had drained away. Hugo's POV. Once he had crafted 3 simple but sturdy stone necklaces using minor telekinesis, Hugo waited for his transformation to time out. Then, after the requisite recharge period, he selected the Galvan form. The shift was instantaneous, the world snapping into hyper-focus as his intellect expanded. He ignored the confused glances from Sunny and Nephis. And with galvanizing speed, he gathered the necklaces and retrieved a piece of scavenger carcass using a sharpened bone shard to inscribe precise runic circles onto each stone pendant. The runes he carved held 2 core concepts within them, senses and empower. It was frustrating. With his current level of skill, 2 enchantments were his limit, a paltry number for a Galvan's mind, which screamed mediocrity. Tisk, tisk, tisk. If only I could remain in this form for more than 10 minutes. Oh, the wonders I could create, he thought, the frustration sharp and deadly. After the long inscribing of runes, he began the delicate process of pouring his own soul essence into the necklaces, saturating the runes. This was the main problem. He was the power source. The enchantments, even though they were passive, designed to subtly enhance the wearer's senses and physical resilience, would only last a few days before the stored essence was depleted. Sunny, Nephis and Cassie couldn't recharge them themselves considering they were sleepers. Although it was a temporary solution, but not a crippling one as he could always recharge them later, still the big flaw of the items bothered Hugo. At last, I'm done, he exclaimed, a wave of mental fatigue washing over him just as the familiar, high-pitched peeping sound signaled the end of his transformation. He reverted to human form, blinking as he looked at the darkening sky. The sun was dipping below the horizon, and the first whispers of the rising dark sea echoed in the distance. The day's already over, Hugo frowned, realizing he had spent the entire afternoon crafting and enchanting the simple gifts, going over multiple cycles of transformation and detransformation. He looked down at the 3 stone necklaces in his hand, their runes glowing faintly with borrowed power. It was a small gesture, but it was a start. Sort of a filler chapter. I really wanted to give Heatblast his own chapter and focus on the sub-skill Hugo has, runic sorcery. It was hard writing this chapter without making it boring ASF, sorry if it's still boring. Progress. Chapter 27, Progress. Hugo, Nephis, Sunny, and Cassie sat in a circle. The trio's expressions shifted from curiosity to stark doubt, especially Cassie, who couldn't see the reason for the others' reactions. Before them lay 3 crudely fashioned stone necklaces, their surfaces etched with faintly glowing runes. Sunny raised an eyebrow, his expression stiff as if dreading an impending social obligation. What exactly are these supposed to be? Hugo smiled, a touch of pride in his voice. These are enchanted items I made for all of you. I thought they might help us on our journey tomorrow. The trio's eyes widened in unison. Eventually Cassie was the first to find her voice, her tone hesitant with awe. Why, you can create enchanted items? Hugo looked at the blind girl with a neutral expression before speaking. Yes, well, not really. The process is complicated. At its essence it's plain runic sorcery, which I'm sure you've heard of during the academy. Anyway, one of my transformations allows me to inscribe the enchantments using a minor power source as its catalyst, he said, looking at the necklaces before adding, and while these trinkets can't be compared to the charms the spell bestows, they should still be useful in our current situation. Cassie nodded slowly, accepting his explanation. Nephis and Sunny, however, were undoubtedly less grateful, their faces masks of cold calculation. Then it was Nephis who broke the silence, her voice low and probing. What do you want in exchange for these? Hugo's eyebrow twitched. Oh, come on, I try to do one nice thing and I'm met with suspicion. A strange uncharacteristic anger flared within him, causing Hugo to let out a long exhale as he barely resisted the urge to hurl the necklaces into the dark sea. Then, meeting Nephis's gaze squarely, he said, I don't really want anything right now. His voice was steady yet a little agitated. Well, aside from surviving, of course. If you three are stronger, my own chances of survival increase. So it's simple, really. Sunny's expression shifted minutely, his disbelief clearly lingering, which stung Hugo quite a bit, especially since one of Hugo's main motives for making the charms had been to get on better terms with the shadowy sleeper. Eventually, practicality won over paranoia. Neffys and Sunny couldn't deny the potential advantage, so one by one, they took the necklaces and put them on. Cassie, in particular, seemed deeply confused when Hugo insisted one was for her. The two enchantments on these are Empower and Senses. They slightly increase your physical abilities and sharpness of your senses. It should be enough to make a difference in a tight spot, Hugo explained. That's not the point, Cassie said, a hint of frustration and helplessness seeping into her voice. This is wasted on me. Neffys or Sunny would have a better use for an extra charm. Hugo looked at her solemnly. Well, I created them, right? So it's my decision who gets them, and I decided that you're getting one. Call it a craftsman's pride, I guess. The blind girl tilted her head slightly, baffled by his logic. That doesn't even make any sense, she murmured, her fingers tightening around the stone pendant. Ah, well, nothing really makes sense in a world filled with super-powered humans walking around and soul-devouring monsters, Hugo replied with a dry chuckle. Strangely, Cassie chuckled too, a soft, wistful sound that was far from fearful. I guess that's true, thank you, Hugo. As he watched the trio don his creations, a strange feeling bloomed in Hugo's chest, a mix of pride and contentment. It was an alien emotion, but different from the foreign influences of his flaw. This one felt genuine, born from his own actions. And that scared him more than anything. Emotions like this were distractions. They could make him soft, and most importantly they can cloud the single-minded hatred for corruption that fueled his very existence. He couldn't afford to forget the torment he had endured. He had to keep going, even if it meant he would gain nothing else. The next day arrived, heavy with harrowing anticipation. The cohort of sleepers descended the headless statue using Cassie's rope, landing safely on the muddy ground. It was then that Sunny summoned his echo. The carapace scavenger materialized in a shower of white sparks, and then the Sunny looked from it to Cassie with a sly grin on his face. Good, he muttered. He turned to her with a smile. I think we can task it with carrying Cassie. Outside of battle, it will help us the most. The blind girl's mouth fell open. Carry me, like a mount. He chuckled and slapped the scavenger on its carapace. This bad boy can fit a petite girl like you with no problem. Trust me, I've clambered on a few of these things. It's actually quite spacious on top, especially when they're not trying to kill you. Cassie hesitated. Well, okay, if you think it's for the best. Hugo and Neffys watched the interaction, their faces blank, but then a bizarre thought crossed Hugo's mind. Maybe turning into a carapace scavenger wouldn't be that bad. Wait, no, focus, damn it. With Cassie riding comfortably atop the scavenger, their speed through the labyrinth increased dramatically, especially with the fact that dealing with the wild carapace scavengers became almost like routine for the trio. Their battle tactic was simple and effective. Hugo would transform, either into the nimble, searing pyronite to melt through carapace, or the brutish Vilgax form to crush and overwhelm them, and launch a devastating assault, aided by Sunny's echo. After Hugo had thinned the herd, Neffys and Sunny would descend, splitting the remaining abominations. They even had their own mini-tactic, where Changing Star would serve as a distraction, allowing Sunny to slip from the shadows and deliver the finishing blows to the abominations. The enchanted necklaces proved their worth here, granting them that crucial extra bit of speed, strength and sensory awareness to react a split second faster. Hugo too found himself was busy with minor tasks, such ensuring the polymorphic crystal was always saturated with soul essence for a quick envy activation, and practicing with his pyronite form, finding its potent heat manipulation incredibly useful for controlling the battlefield, even if Vilgax's raw power was unmatched for single targets. That said, they were not invincible, of course. From time to time, they had to take lengthy detours to avoid creatures that radiated a palpable, overwhelming danger. But still, their morale was steady and focused. For the first time, Hugo felt that his companions were strangely calm. Not happy, but operating with a focused efficiency that was a far cry from the grim despair of the previous days. It was a fragile comfort. Of course, even that didn't last. At some point, Cassie asked them to stop, which made the trio look at her with deep frowns etched their faces. They all understood the implications. What is it? Nefis asked. The blind girl let go of the reins. Do you hear anything? They looked at each other, then shook their heads. No. Why? Cassie scowled. Help me get off this thing. After they helped her down, she stood motionless for a while, listening intently. Her scowl deepened. Then, she cautiously knelt and pressed her ear to the ground. What do you hear? Sunny asked, his voice tense. Cassie licked her lips. It's murmuring. Hugo's eyes widened. His enhanced senses, sharpened by Anatomica and Conqueror's Wrath, Chimur picked up what the others could not, a low, growing rumble that was not thunder. We need to move. Now, Hugo shouted, his expression grim. As Nefis turned to him, Sunny grabbed Cassie and helped her stand. His face was paler than usual with panic flashing in his eyes. It seemed Sunny had understood what was going to happen. Help me get her back on the scavenger. The silver-haired girl raised her head, and her expression darkened as she too sensed the shift in the air. Without a word, she helped hoist Cassie back onto the Echo. Cassie, disoriented, grabbed the reins. Neff, what is going on? Changing Star glanced at her, her voice heavy. A storm is coming. Meanwhile, Sunny sent his shadow scrambling up a tall coral pillar to scout ahead. The cliffs they were aiming for were still a considerable distance away, and the giant statue was now far behind them, so turning back would be suicide. He turned to Nefis. We're about 3 or 4 kilometers from the cliffs. Do you think we can make it? She scowled. If we take the most direct route. Maybe. Sunny hesitated. What about the monsters? Let's kill all of them, Hugo interjected, making Sunny pale. That's it. That's the plan, Sunny thought, frantically trying to devise a trick, any trick, to save them. Nefis turned, her gaze sharp. What are you waiting for? Run. Dash. They darted forward just as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The wind howled through the coral blades, whipping mud and debris into the air. The sunlight dimmed as storm clouds blotted out the sky, casting a cold, premature twilight over the labyrinth. Sunny led, his shadow scouting the most direct path. Nefis and Hugo was a step behind, and lastly, the scavenger carrying Cassie stomped through the mud in the rear. Abandoning all caution, they moved with desperate speed. The inhabitants of the labyrinth were just as panicked. Scavengers burrowed into coral or hid in mounds, their aggression replaced by primal fear. But the storm was faster. The rain became a pelting, blinding downpour. The winds strengthened, threatening to knock them off their feet. A blinding bolt of lightning tore through the darkness, followed instantly by a thunderclap that shook the very ground. Sunny lost his footing, tumbling into the mud. An arm, Hugo's, grabbed his shoulder and hauled him upright. Hurry, Nefis shouted, looking at Hugo and Sunny, who were now a bit further than where she was, her voice barely audible over the storm's roar. By the time Sunny and Hugo were running, the dark sea was already descending on the lands, once more rising with terrifying speed, drowning the sleepers. In a sudden flash of lightning, they saw it, the dark mass of the cliffs. Almost simultaneously, a terrible, ground-shaking rumble echoed from the depths of the labyrinth behind them. Turning back, they saw a colossal, black wall of water rushing through the crimson forest, shattering coral and tossing a hapless scavenger against a wall like a toy, its unbreakable carapace exploding on impact. Hey guys, do you trust me? Hugo shouted. Now really not the time for this shit. Hugo, Sunny shouted back. Hugo activated his Omnitrix, transforming into the towering form of Velogix. Without any further delay, he grabbed Sunny, Nefis and Cassie, making them stick to his gigantic shoulders. Sunny, surprised by TRH's sudden action, quickly dismissed his echo before muttering a silent curse. Hugo exhaled before crouching a little, saturating his entire body with soul essence before leaping upward with terrifying speed, scaling the massive cliff. A moment later, the wall of black water smashed into the cliff base. The entire rock face shuddered violently. Boulders dislodged from above, tumbling past them into the churning foam as Hugo latched into the walls with the trio on his back, climbing as fast as he possibly can. Not finding anything to grab, Hugo simply punched handholds into the rock, making chunks of debris fall as they continued their ascent. The water chased them, but it was no match for the Chimera Sui Generous's desperate strength, and then, finally, Hugo's massive form crested the cliff edge, and he rolled, depositing his 3 drenched and gasping companions onto solid ground before collapsing beside them with a ground-shaking thud. Sunny lay on the ground, struggling to breathe, his body screaming in protest. To his right, Neffes was in a similar state herself while Cassie sat a few feet away, shivering but safe compared to the rest. He wanted to laugh, but had no strength for it. They had survived, and this time, they had survived because of the monster in their midst. Sometimes later, a low peeping sound was heard by the trio as Hugo transformed back to his human form in a flash of red light. Fantastic, he sighed, feeling a bit blind without his enhanced senses. Then, Sunny moaned and get up hurriedly, startling Hugo a little. Don't tell me, I am not sure yet. Just wait here, I'll go check. With that, Sunny disappeared, leaving the two girls with the shapeshifter. Thankfully the shadow did not leave them for long, returning around 10 minutes later. It's me, a voice from the shadow spoke, making Hugo and Neffes tense before realizing it was Sunny. What is the situation? Changing Star said, careful to keep her voice low. Sunny slowly exhaled before speaking. There are 8 scavengers around us. But they're all dead. The killer is one of those big monsters we saw, the thing with the crimson pattern on its carapace and scythes instead of pincers. It's hiding from the storm beneath a stone ridge not far from here. A bolt of lightning flashed, illuminating everything around. Neffes' eyes seemed to glow slightly during this sequence, making Hugo wonder if she really was the protagonist of this world. She tilted her head and whispered, as though talking to herself. An awakened monster. Sunny licked his lips. Yeah, so, what should we do? Sunny shouldn't. That'd be obvious by now. The paragon of purity spoke up. No. Although he couldn't see his face, Hugo could tell Sunny had a horrified expression in his face. We kill it, Changing Star said, wiping all doubt and hope from Sunny's mind. But it's an awakened monster, he said, making sure to keep his shouting muffled. We don't really have much of a choice, it's either we kills it or we die here. Quote. Hugo sprawled on the ground, ready to sleep before he heard Changing Star voice continue. We can't leave the cliffs before morning, and neither can the monster. However, once the sun rises, it will easily see us and attack. Then, our only advantage, the element of surprise, will be gone. If we have to fight it anyway, it's better to be the ones initiating the fight. He instantly paled just as much as Sunny. Wait, you mean we have to fight it now? He groaned, already knowing the answer. He was feeling extremely tired from being the main tank of the cohort, so he had hoped there would be a time to rest. Cursd this godforsaken land. It took a bit of convincing, but Sunny had finally relented after Neffes explained her reasonings. Hugo had understood something about Changing Star during this small conversation. She's insane, he thought, being guided towards the awakened beast by Sunny. She had used the term, just, when referring to an awakened beast, and went on to explain why they could kill it without even flinching, which Hugo did find a bit cool, although he'd never admit that. Contemplating his realization, Hugo came across another fact: he too was insane to an extent. As he wasn't even worried about fighting the awakened monster, but more precisely, he was annoyed by the lack of sleep. Well, that's an interesting information, he thought before turning to Sunny and Neffes. Alright, so, do I light him up or go with the usual? Neffes shook her head a little. It's better that you go with brute force. Using that fire transformation would be a hindrance in this environment, not to mention it would draw some of the abominations here. Sunny, although still unsure about this entire ordeal, nodded. Also, make sure to leave a good distance between us before you transform, because the flash would reveal our location. This son of... Hugo sighed, I really hate this place. Grumbling, he summoned Black Pearl Trident, enjoying its muffling effect as he crept near the slumbering awakened monster. Finally, once there was a few steps between him and the monster, Hugo slammed his Omnitrix, causing a blue flash of light. The monster instantly awoke, hurrying to consume the source of the light. But its giant scythes were stopped by a massive tentacled arm. Before the monster could make its next move, Hugo drove his trident towards the abomination, driving it deeper every moment. But the Centurion was not going to sit idly and let itself be killed. It moved around Hugo's towering frame, easily escaping the clutches of his spear and brining its massive scythes on Hugo's leg. Through his enhanced senses, the paragon of purity kicked the scythe away before thrusting his trident to the ground, burying the abomination limb to the ground. Before it could scream, Hugo let go of his trident, making sure it held the Centurion other side long enough, and then saturated his body with essence before delivering a barrage of harrowing blows to the abomination. Left, right, up, down. Blood stained Hugo Green's skin as he beat the abomination to death, but then the creature somehow managed to spin its scythe, entirely grabbing Hugo's arm moment before it could crush its chest. However, a certain treacherous shadow jumped from the shadows at that exact moment, wielding a beautiful azure sword and then cutting off its scythe. From the ground, a radiant star moved towards the nightmare creature's legs, cutting them like they were made of mundane paper and cashing the abomination to lose its center of balance, essentially tripping without anything to support it. Seeing the opportunity, Hugo extended his giant arm, grabbing the creature's torso and holding it firmly. Snap! Under his physical might, the awakened monster body slowly started to fall apart, but that did not matter due to a certain treacherous shadow lurking on Hugo's back. Sunny leapt towards the abomination, his azure blade extended in a thrust as it cleanly cut the creature head off. Hugo could not hear it, but Sunny had just received a memory. A very fashionable one at that. Sorry again for late upload, I tried to change some stuff then in the original. Like how the cohort are progressing much faster with Hugo around, them killing more scavengers, and lastly the carapace centurion shit not injuring Sunny too severely. Developments. Chapter 28, Developments. The last sparks of life fled the carapace centurion's body as its head was cut off by a certain treacherous shadow. It went limp in Hugo's gargantuan grasp, its thrashing ceasing as the light died in its multifaceted eyes. Hugo, still in his Vilgax form, tossed the heavy carcass aside with a grunt, the impact sending a tremor through the ground. He wrenched his trident free and turned to his companions, his expression a bit stiffer than usual. To think a single awakened monster could push us this far, Hugo rumbled, his voice low and tired. Sunny gasped for air, his body still trembling from the exertion of delivering the final blow. Well, sleepers like us don't have any business fighting awakened monsters in the first place, so it's natural they'd feel this powerful. Changing Star simply nodded, her expression one of grim acceptance. This was the natural order of things. Sleepers like them were incredibly weak, the very bottom of the food chain. But Hugo couldn't, accept that. He was not an average sleeper. He was a wielder of a divine aspect, a phenomenon unheard of in recorded history. His very existence broke multiple rules imposed by the nightmare spell. He could become an awakened creature himself even if it was only for 10 minutes, through this he effectively skipped ranks that constrained others, turning him into an awakened. For a sleeper to struggle against a monster was understandable. For an awakened to struggle was a mark of failure. The thought curdled in his gut, causing a deep, sharp disappointment in himself. He wasn't utilizing his true potential. He needed more knowledge, more skill, more power. He needed to excel in every facet of the terrible powers he carried. After all, for a wretch like him, there was no other path forward. Back at their makeshift camp on the cliffside, the cohort huddled together for warmth against the storm's residual chill. Hugo, still transformed into his massive Vilgax form, served as a living windbreak, his colossal size allowing the others to find a pocket of relative comfort until the storm finally abated and he reverted to his human form with a familiar flash of red light. In the bottle's aftermath, Sunny had received a memory, a sturdy, gray armor, from the slain centurion, and in a move that surprised no one more than himself, had given it to Nephis. Her chitinous flesh had been shattered in the fight, leaving her exposed. The timing was strangely perfect, but Hugo didn't really mind. The soul shards on the other hands were split between Nephis and Hugo. Sunny had easily relinquished his share despite being the one to land the killing blow. Now human again, Hugo sat apart, gazing at the oppressive, gray sky with a mix of uncertainty in his eyes. He recounted the strange events of his life, realizing how the last month of his life had been simply unreal. He had been infected by the nightmare spell, survived a first nightmare by bonding with a mysterious divine relic, gained a divine aspect and a true name, traveled to the Awand Academy and became the youngest practitioner of runic sorcery, and was now trapped in this hellish labyrinth, traveling with a disgraced legacy princess, a paranoid shadow gremlin and a blind seer. The speed of it all was dizzying, forcing him to confront everything he had once believed about himself. Things like his old dreams and goals felt distant and blurred as if they were dreams he faintly remembered. The hatred for the spell and the nightmare creatures was a constant burning coal in his heart, but his ultimate goal still eluded him. Hugo was not a naive fool, and so he knew that even if he spent a lifetime killing abominations across the dream realm, he wouldn't even make a dent in their infinite numbers. But things would be different if he conquered the third nightmare, becoming one of the few transcendent champion of humanity, one wielding a divine aspect no less. His breath hitched slightly as he imagined how powerful that version of himself would be. With that kind of harrowing power, he could probably challenge the fourth nightmare, perhaps even become humanity's very first supreme. The glory of such achievements held no allure for him. What he craved more than anything in this world was power. The power to never again be weak and vulnerable again. The power to never be subjected to the torment he endured in his first nightmare. And most importantly, the powerful to never relive the torment of his mother's death. It was this burning need that led him to attempt a very dangerous gamble. He found Sunny sitting alone on the cliff's edge, staring into the abyss below. Hugo sat down beside him, the silence stretching for a moment before he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Hey, Sunny, can you do me a favor?" The shadow's gaze instantly hardened, his pale face shifting into a mask of familiar, calculating distrust, yet Hugo clearly noticed something strange. The edges of that suspicion seemed slightly less sharper than before, as if tempered by a hint of weary contemplation. "Color me surprised," Hugo thought. Sunny shrugged, not looking at him. "Well, that depends entirely on what this favor is." Hugo sighed, searching for the right words. "It's not really that complicated. I just need you to kill me if I turn into a nightmare creature. You know, if I get corrupted." Sunny nearly toppled over the cliff's edge. He whipped his head around, eyes wide with disbelief. "Come again, I think I misheard you. I thought you just asked me to kill why?" "Yes, Sunny, I did just ask you to kill me. Why?" It was a reasonable reaction. Hugo's request stemmed from his decision to challenge another pseudo-nightmare trial to gain a new imprint to his arsenal. Had he been alone, he would have ventured in without a second thought, but he wasn't alone anymore. These people relied on him and he too relied on them. The problem itself was unknown. What happened if he failed one of the trials? Would he be ejected unharmed, or would the corruption he was purging instead turn him into an abomination? In either case, he wasn't willing to bet their lives on that answer. If he was to be consumed, he would rather be put down by someone he'd asked than live as a profane nightmare creature. Of course, this wasn't a plan for suicide, as Hugo was not planning on dying. "I'm about to do something that might be really dangerous," Hugo explained, his gaze unwavering. "If it goes wrong, I turn into something wrong, and I want you to kill me. For everyone's safety." Sunny scoffed, unconvinced. "Let's say I believe you. Do you really have to do this thing that might turn you into an abomination?" "Yes." Hugo's reply was immediate and sharp, leaving no room for argument. "It must be done, no matter what." Sunny held his gaze for a long, tense moment before letting out a resigned sigh. "Why me?" "Well, Sunny, how do I put this?" Hugo said, a grim smile touching his lips. "You have something Nephis doesn't." "Oh, and what might that be?" "You're dangerous, Sunny. I could tell from the moment I saw you in the academy. If you knew something was a direct threat to your life, you would stop at anything to eliminate it, and that's a fact I'm certain of." His expression fell slightly before adding, "I don't know Nephis well enough to be sure she'd make that call." Sunny's sharp eyes swept over Hugo, dissecting every word. He seemed momentarily taken aback that someone had seen through his true colors, but he didn't bother to deny it. "Fine," Sunny said finally, "I'll do it. But let's say you do this mysterious thing, turn into a monster, and I kill you. What the hell am I supposed to tell Nephis and Cassie?" Hugo lingered for a moment before sitting in a meditative pose. "Well, figure that out." With that, he closed his eyes and dove into his soul sea, leaving the treacherous shadow on the cliff edge with an expression of profound and utter annoyance. Hugo found himself once more in the vast, blue maze of his soul. This time he easily navigated the maze due to having memorized the paths and turns, soon arriving before the shimmering ethereal rift. Stepping through, Hugo entered the cold sterile chamber with its 10 monolithic pods. 9 of them still swirled with their respective liquids, each one containing a vile seed of corruption at its heart. "So which one do I go for?" he pondered, his hand on his chin. "Red, green, gray, blue. Logically, the harder the battle, the greater the reward, but Hugo wasn't really sure if he wanted to face something too powerful yet. Out of all the pods, he felt that the blue one practically called to him, its color a comforting echo of the Omnitrix's energy, not to mention that blue was his favorite color. But an instinctual warning flared in his mind, that one felt different. Deeper and more alien. He remembered how difficult the Pyronite trial was, and so fighting a creature that seemed too unique was not something he was willing to risk. Eventually, after looking around, his eyes settled on a pod filled with a vibrant, almost aggressive vermilion liquid. The form within seemed solid and powerful, but the reason Hugo felt drawn to it was because it resembled human blood strangely enough. He approached pod, peering into its depths until he spotted the dark, malevolent seed pulsating within it. Steeling himself, Hugo reached out and pressed his hand against the cool, invisible surface of the glad, his body phasing through as if it was water. Corrupted DNA sample detected. Corruption detected. Purifying corruption. Purification impossible. Failsafe activated. Generating a trial. Wielder of the Omnitrix. Prepare for your trial. The familiar void appeared before Hugo, followed by the azure star of the Omnitrix erupting from his arm. It consumed the nothingness, rewriting reality once again. When the light faded, Hugo stood in the center of a colossal, circular arena carved from dark, crimson stone. Tiered seating rose around him into a hazy, orange sky, empty and utterly devoid of life. This was a place of combat, a gladiator's pit on a scale that was both grand and deeply unnerving. Before he could fully take in his surroundings, a figure materialized on the opposite end of the arena, making Hugo's breath caught in his throat. It was a monstrous humanoid, easily 12 feet tall, with skin the color of dried blood. Its most horrifying feature was its 4 arms, each one thick with corded muscle and ending in 4-fingered clawed hands. Its head was elongated, with a pronounced cranium and a face that was almost a mockery of life itself, featuring 4 predatory yellow eyes that burned with a familiar, profane blackness. The creature's posture was one of pure, unadulterated aggression, and the corruption that wreathed it made Hugo's skin crawl. It was repulsive and a perversion of all things sane. Without a moment's hesitation, Hugo slammed the Omnitrix dial. Blue light enveloped him, his bones and flesh cracking and reshaping before transforming completely. In an instant, the form of a chimera sui generis stood where the human had been. This was the form he knew best, the one whose instincts were now his own in battle. The 4-armed abomination didn't make a single sound. It simply charged, its powerful legs eating up the distance with terrifying speed. Hugo met the charge, his trident ready. As the creature lunged, all 4 of its fists swung in a devastating simultaneous pummel. Hugo brought his trident up in a cross block, but the force of the impact was unbelievable. The shaft of his weapon groaned under the strain, and he was thrown backward, skidding across the rough stone. Strong. Far stronger than the Pyronite. The creature was on him again, its movements practically a blur. Hugo this time swung his trident in a wide arc, forcing it to duck under the blow. He tried to counter with a thrust, but one of its lower arms snaked out, grabbing the trident's shaft with an iron grip. The other 3 arms rained blows on his torso and head. His rock-like skin cracked under the assault. Hugo roared in pain and fury, releasing the trident and tackling the creature low, who was smaller than him, wrapping his tentacled arms around its legs. Raising them upward before slamming its body on the ground over and over again, eventually spinning it and sending it flying towards one of the colossal walls. The paragon of purity grabbed its spear and rushed towards the abomination like a herald of death, thrusting his spear into its right shoulder and impaling it to the wall. Just as Hugo was about to unleash his might on the abomination, it began doing something bizarre. The creature, instead of struggling to free itself, simply pulled away from the trident, ripping away one of its 4 arms. Hugo's eyes widened before a terrible punch hit him with the force of a mountain, sending him flying upwards. The creature did not stop, it leapt upward with a terrible speed, reaching Hugo mid-fall and tacking him in the sky, punching him again and again until his blood was spilled. Damn it, Hugo cursed as he spinned in the air, trying to swat away the red abomination, but it never relented. Eventually slamming into the ground with Hugo under it. They tumbled together in a furious tangle of limbs. The abomination's free hands hammered into his back, each blow a localized earthquake. Hugo responded by sinking his teeth into its shoulder, tasting something foul and oily as he ripped apart a portion of its other arm. The creature shrieked, a sound of pure, corrupted rage, and used its 2 remaining free hands to pry him off, hurling him across the arena. Hugo crashed into the base of the spectator stands, stones splintering around him. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest and pain. It was clear to him now that this wasn't working. He was stronger than most thing he'd faced so far, but this thing was a pure brawler, and it was winning. As it stalked toward him, Hugo unsummoned and resummoned his trident back into his hand, taking his usual combat stance. Hugo knew that he had to change tactics. He couldn't win a direct contest of strength, so he simply needed to be smarter, which was fairly simple to do. The wounded creature leapt upward again, attempting to reach Hugo. In turn, Hugo simply waited, not moving a single muscle. Not yet. The creature figure grew closer. Not yet. Then, right as he was mere inches away from it, Hugo dodged the attack by simply stepping out of its way, letting the creature slam headfirst into the broken seats. Then, Hugo didn't attack it, he simply raised his trident and pointed at it at the ceiling of the Colosseum building. His trident was fused with polymorphic crystal, gaining its enchantments. Envy flared up, releasing a wave of kinetic energy that destroyed a large portion of the area. All the debris fell right on top of the confused abomination, burying it under the immense weight. Hugo himself jumped out of there before the impact hit, watching from afar as the entire building begun to collapse. "Komon," he mumbled, then he heard the mechanical voice of the Omnitrix speak. "Corruption purged. DNA sample purified. You have acquired an essence imprint. Wake up, paragon of purity. Hugo opened his eyes, finding himself in the strange room within his soul sea once again. He let out a long sigh of relief at surviving the trial. Without wasting any more time, he summoned the runes. Imprint, Tetraman. Imprint rank, Awakened. Imprint class, Beast. Imprint description: the most powerful champions of the Red Colosseum, the true children of war, knew no equal in battle, their sheer might alone rivaling all other noble creature, but they too found the mercy of Shadow once the daughter of war. Solvain unleashed the madness of hope upon them. Imprint attributes: Titan Blood Brawler, Acrobatic, Battle Master. Imprint abilities: Hugo looked at the description offered by the spell with a curious expression. He did not know who Solvain was and what madness the spell referred to, but the fact that the spell bothered to mention her name meant she was quite important. So this imprint has a relation to War God, who's also the god of advancement. He wondered if the small Galvans had any relation to War God, which would make the Tetraman and the Galvan technically siblings. Well, that's certainly a thought. Hugo ignored the useless ideas forming in his childish mind and read the description of the attributes. Titanic Blood description: the Tetraman raw physical power is unmatched. Brawler description: the Tetraman's battle art is engraved within their blood. Acrobatics description: the Tetraman mastered wars, eventually reaching the conclusion that mastering the movement of the body was the key to winning any battle. Battle Master description: a Tetraman intelligence shines brighter in battle. Hugo smiled a little as he exited his soul sea. Immediately he saw Sunny holding his azure blade, looking at him with a sharp gaze. Before the shadow could cut off his head, Hugo raised his hands. "Relax, I'm fine." Strangle enough. Sunny stiffened as if disappointed by that fact. Rude. Hugo got up, stretching a little. "Hey Sunny, how about we have a little spar? I enjoyed making this fight." Opening parenthesis : Hehe, favorite boy 4 arms is making an entrance. Also, I'm getting a bit tired of this journey, so I might skip through the journey towards Soul Devourer now that I've finished important stuff such as Hugo powers, his emotional shit, and some bonding time with the cohort. Bone Ridge. Chapter 29. Bone Bridge. Sunny stretched, the familiar weight of the azure blade solid in his hand as he settled into a fighting stance. Across from him, Hugo was fiddling with the dial on his wrist, a focused expression on his face. On the sidelines, Nefis and Cassie sat observing, serving as audience for the impending spar, which was quite bizarre considering one of them couldn't see. "Do I really have to be the one fighting you?" Sunny grumbled, unable to keep the grumpiness from his voice. "Nefis is a far better swordsman, you know." The paragon of purity looked at him with an amused glint in his eye. "Well, that's exactly why I picked you. Nefis is sort of, how do I say this? Too good. We, on the other hand, are both a bit lacking, so training with each other should be a good experience for you too, right? Sort of like helping you find your own footing." Sunny raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You're saying this because you want to test out whatever new transformation you have won me, aren't you?" Hugo's only answer was a wide, unapologetic smile as he slammed the Omnitrix dial down. A flash of blue light engulfed him, then in a heartbeat, the short sleeper was gone, replaced by a towering, red-skinned fiend. The creature was a mountain of muscle, standing significantly taller than Hugo's human form. Its most striking feature was its 4 powerful arms, each corded with strength. 4 predatory yellow eyes glinted above a fierce, almost helmet-like facial structure, and a black stripe ran from its nose down to its neck. Unlike Hugo's other, more monstrous forms. This one wore a semblance of clothing, golden wrists and ankle bands on each hand and 2 sashes across its broad chest. Lastly, it had jet black pants and 4 fingerless gloves. A tattoo-like stripes adorned its red skin, giving it the look of a brutal brawler from before the Dark Ages. Note that Sunny has ever seen a brawler, but he was focused on something else right now. Sunny stared, his grip tightening on his sword. How am I supposed to fight against that? He shouted, his voice straining to contain his sheer annoyance. Hugo, now in the body of the 4-armed Tetraman, stretched his new limbs, the motion fluid and unnervingly natural. A confident smile played on his alien features. Oh, come on, a little light spar won't be that bad, you can test out the results of your training with Nephis. Sunny scoffed, biting back the urge to shout a myriad of slurs at the strange creature. He launched himself forward. There was no point in complaining further. The fight was, certainly a fight. Sunny pushed himself forward, employing the fledgling combat style he'd been painstakingly cultivating under Nephis's tutelage. He darted and weaved, his movements sharp and precise, aiming to find gaps in the Tetraman's defense. Yet, to his growing frustration, he immediately noticed that something was off. Hugo was different. His movements were more precise and balanced, his reactions faster and more experienced than they should have been. It wasn't just the usual burst of raw power he gained when transformed, but instead it was a deep, ingrained skill that Sunny was desperately trying to match. Hugo, for his part, was also learning. Through the Tetraman's enhanced senses and battle instincts, he analyzed Sunny's style. There was something strangely nascent about it, a unique foundation that was entirely different from Nephi's battle art. If he wasn't a Tetraman right now, he would have never been able to notice that. It was unrefined, and even Sunny himself didn't know of its existence, but it was there, a shadow of a future personalized for Sunny alone. Between exchanges of blows, Hugo was able to offer sharp, practical tips. Your lunge is too telegraphed. Pivot on your back foot. Or, you're overcommitting. Although the thing that amused him the most was when he mentioned the nascent battle art that Sunny possessed. He saw it immediately in Sunny's eyes. The shadowy sleeper fell silent, a storm of thoughts brewing in his mind. Strangely enough, Hugo felt proud. It seemed Tetraman had a soft spot in their hearts for training people and seeing them progress. Fitting for a race created by the god of advancement. Hugo thought, wondering if something as cruel and vile as war could coexist with something as beautiful and wonderful as advancement and progress. Later, both of them sweating and breathing heavily, Hugo took a long drink from Cassie's endless spring and tossed the memory to Sunny, who used it to wash the grime and sweat from his face. For a while they sat there in silence without saying a word. Hey, Sunny, can I ask you something? Hugo said, his gaze drifting toward the gray grim sky. Sunny eyed him warily, his voice strangely guarded. Well, that depends on the question. But sure. After we get out of here and become awakened, do you have any plans? Any dreams? Sunny's eyes narrowed in surprise. He was silent for a long moment, an internal war visible on his face before he finally relented with a tired sigh. Well, I'm not really sure. I guess I just want to live a comfortable and peaceful life. Maybe open a shop, or get a safe, boring job in Bastion. And yes, I know that sounds stupid and boring, but it beats charging headfirst into an early grave against nightmare creatures. Hugo smiled slightly with a soft, genuine expression that didn't quite reach his wistful eyes. No, I don't think that's a stupid dream at all. It's quite nice, actually. The response seemed to disarm Sunny more than any of Hugo's transformations ever had. He simply stared at him, trying to reconcile this sudden glimpse of vulnerability with the shapeshifter's usually inscrutable personality. For a moment, he felt like he was seeing the real person. Eventually, Sunny just sighed. Well, what about you? What do you want to do after you awaken? Hugo's azure eyes suddenly ignited with a dangerous focused light. I'll work on growing my strength as fast as possible and challenge the second nightmare. Sunny wasn't surprised by the answer, but the terrifying intensity behind it still sent a chill down his spine. He's just like her, he thought, noticing that the same burning ambition he saw in Nephi's eyes. And then what? Live as a master, you realize that the chances of dying in a nightmare are incredibly high, right? Even the strongest awakened can fail their second trial, Sunny pressed, his voice steady. He didn't particularly care if Hugo lived or died. That was his own choice, and Sunny respected personal freedom more than anything, but he wanted to understand the thing that drove him. Sunny, if I don't gain enough power, I will be nothing more than a walking corpse, Hugo stated, his tone flat and final. What I'm trying to say is, if I want to live long enough to achieve my goals, I need to become an ascended. No, I need to go further beyond that and reach transcendence and even beyond that. It's the only path forward for someone like me. Sunny didn't follow up, he simply let the conversation die there, but he was somewhat glad to have grasped a piece of his companion's driving force. It was an ambition that made Sunny ponder more deeply what he truly wanted from his own future. Days later, survival montage. The scene was one of routine carnage. Hugo, in his hulking Tetraman form, dubbed Forearms by a begrudgingly creative Sunny, stood over the twitching corpse of a carapace scavenger, wiping azure blood from his trident with 2 of his 4 hands. The other 2 hands were already prying open the creature's carapace to extract the soul shard within. Nearby, Sunny sat on another dead scavenger meticulously cleaning his azure blade. This efficiency was born from a week of relentless repetition as their days had slowly settled into a grim rhythm: defend their current cliffside perch, venture down to hunt, let abominations weaken each other, then finish off the survivors. Neffys moved between the corpses, her movements fast, and without wasting a single moment, she collected soul shards. Hugo, with his quadruple limbs, could dissect a carcass in half the time, so he moved to assist her. Grumbling slightly, the Tetraman looked towards Sunny with an annoyed expression. Hey, stop trying to look cool and come help us. Sunny looked down at him from the scavenger body and retorted with a smile. No, Hugo sighed, unwilling to reason with the shadow. He had grown quite strange these last couple of days. Especially after Neffys had joined them in their training, their growth was simply monstrous. Sunny was slowly beginning to glimpse his nascent battle art while improving his physical body in the process, while Neffys had been growing stronger through absorbing soul shards, her flames becoming more tyrannical by the day. Hugo's growth, on the other hand, was the most visually dramatic of the 3. His soul fragment count had surged to 253 1/1000ths, a quarter of the way to saturation. The pseudo-trial had granted a massive lump sum and the constant hunts did the rest. This growing reservoir of soul essence not only empowered his transformations but also subtly enhanced his dormant human body, making him faster and stronger even without using his aspect. This progress sparked a relentless idea in his mind, one so impossible that no awakened in the entire world could even seriously pursue. Natural awakening. What separated a dormant human from an awakened one was the mastery of soul essence. His transformations granted him a temporary borrowed version of this power. But what if he could learn to grasp it, to keep a sliver of that knowledge and feeling in his human form? Could he force an awakening without the help of the nightmare spell? His goal for now was quite clear: to become truly awakened and gain a new ability of his aspect. Not to mention that wielding his transformations for longer would be a necessary evolution for his and the cohort survival. So as they experienced more horrors of the dream realm, the cohort slowly transformed. No longer just lost children, they became a hardened unit of survivors. Cassie, while still unable to fight, grew more adept at managing her blindness, her presence becoming less of a burden and more a part of their group's fabric. The enchanted necklace Hugo had given her provided a constant subtle boost to her senses, granting her a little more independence. Their teamwork, on the other hand, grew into their greatest weapon. Sunny and Neffys developed a near telepathic synergy in battle, their movements perfectly complementary. Hugo, on the other hand, acted as their spearhead and their anvil, his transformations allowing them to engage threats that would have been suicide for regular sleepers. Whether as the searing pyronite, the brutal forearms, or the overwhelming chimera, he created openings they could exploit. They also learned to use the labyrinth's geography and the inherent animosity between different nightmare creature tribes to their advantage, luring them into conflicts and mopping up the wounded victors. The goal of reaching the mysterious human castle no longer felt like a hopeless fantasy, but a distant, tangible point on a map they were slowly, bloodily, traversing. They were getting closer. After collecting the soul shards and some crafting materials, and some oil which Neffys insisted on taking, the trio retraced their moves and quickly grabbed Cassie before moving further into the labyrinth. Their destination was a certain bone ridge that Sunny managed to find through scouting. It was a gigantic part of the labyrinth that was entirely made of bones, hence the name. Neffys theorized that it most likely was the skeletal remains of a colossal sea monster that was located on an enormous mound of chaotically growing coral, with its arching spine protruding especially high above the ground. It was impossible to say what the terrifying creature had looked like while it was still alive, but one thing was certain, it was gargantuan even by the standards of the Dark Sea. Maybe a titan, but how would a titan even die? The answer was quite simple, it would have died to an even more harrowing abomination. Hugo thought as they reached the outer side of the bone ridge. We'll have to go around, Nefis said looking at the gigantic structure. It was a logical conclusion considering they couldn't scale the bones, but Hugo seemed to have a different idea. I don't think that would be necessarily, Hugo said before pressing his Omnitrix and turning into a Tetraman. Sunny, please dismiss your echo. The shadowy sleeper raised an eyebrow before helping Cassie mount off and returning the scavenger to his soul sea. Suddenly Nefis' eyes widened as she realized what he was trying to do. You wouldn't, she said slightly horrified. Hugo smiled devilishly as he grabbed Sunny, Nefis and Cassie, putting the former two on his back and making them hold on for their life while two of his lower hands held Cassie like she was an infant. Then the paragon of purity saturated his body with essence, leaping a harrowing distance into the sky before slamming head first into the bone ridge. Using his two free hands, Hugo scaled the structure with incredible speed, using his unique biology to leap dozens of feet into the sky per jump. In the span of minutes they reached the very top of the bone ridge without a scratch on them. Sunny jumped from Hugo back, holding the urge to puke his earlier launch. You maniac, Nefis simply sighed while Hugo helped Cassie to get back on her feet. What? This is better than going through the coral labyrinth, and I'm quite tired of dealing with scavengers. They're annoying. Sunny wanted to retort, but his reasoning made sense, so he remained silent after mumbling a couple of slurs under his breath. Let's go, there could be some airborne abominations around here, so we should be careful. The trio nodded before silently continuing their journey. The next day, Hugo watched the last of the Dark Sea recede, the black water pulling back from the bone bridge with a sound like a dying gasp. The air felt strangely heavy today, well heavier than most days. He saw Sunny sit up, his expression sour. The shadow user had been on edge since dusk yesterday, and Hugo didn't need a seer's vision to know it was connected to whatever vast shadow Cassie had named. The Crimson Spire. The name alone screamed of how dangerous the place was. Nefis was already awake, her posture straight as she opened her eyes. A ghost of white flame flickered and died in their gray depths. She offered Sunny one of her newly practiced slightly stiff smiles. Hugo and Sunny both had to give her credit, she was trying. The disgraced heiress was diligently learning to mimic human interaction, studying Cassie's easy mannerisms with the same focus she applied to sword drills. It was a strange, almost disturbing sight, but Hugo understood the drive to reshape oneself for survival. He was doing much the same, but also the exact opposite considering he was training to become a better non-human. After a quick, silent breakfast of dried scavenger meat, Nefis stood. Let's study the surroundings. Sunny just grunted in agreement, summoning his echo to stand guard over a still sleepy Cassie. From this height up here, they could see what was beyond the bone ridge after a little bit of walking west. What met them wasn't the familiar, endless crimson labyrinth. Instead it was a corpse of a landscape. The vibrant coral was gone, replaced by a sprawling expanse of gray, brittle, and dead reef. It looked sick, drained of all life and color. Further out, the walls had fully collapsed into a vast, flat plain of ash-gray sand. No movement stirred in the mud below. No scavengers, no centipedes, nothing. The silence was profound and deeply unnerving. And in the center of this dead zone, rising from a massive, barrow-like hill, was a tree. It was a monstrosity of nature, a tower of black bark that speared the gray sky, its canopy a sprawling, bloody crimson. It was magnificent and utterly terrifying. Then, a glint of light flashed from its base, a bright, mirror-like reflection that winked in and out of existence. Hugo's hand instinctively went to the Omnitrix. Something deep within him, a primal instinct shared by all his imprints, screamed that this place was wrong. It was a trap, a beautiful, silent, and empty trap. What the hell is that? Sunny finally whispered, voicing the question they all shared. Nefis was silent for a long time, her face a mask of cold calculation. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat. This is the only way west. Hugo scowled slightly, using his emerald spyglass to get a better look of the tree. So it's a chokepoint, a beautiful, obviously cursed chokepoint. Sunny grimaced, looking from the ashen wasteland to Nefis. Are you sure you want to do this? Changing Star didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the distant, glimmering tree. Do we have a choice? We always have a choice, Hugo countered, his tone sharp. The choice between certain death and almost certain death. This, he gestured at the dead landscape, reeks of the latter. Nothing lives there, nothing, not even the mindless scavengers. Why do you think that is? Maybe they know something we don't, Sonny muttered, his shadow coiling anxiously at his feet. Exactly my point, Hugo said. Neffy's finally turned her head, her gray eyes locking with his. Cassie's vision pointed west. The castle is west. To go around this would take weeks, maybe months we don't have. Our supplies won't last and our luck certainly won't. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the dead coral. A visible danger is better than an unknown one. At least we know what to face. Do we? Hugo shot back. We see a dead land and a big tree. We have no idea what's in there. That glimmer, it could be anything. And it could be nothing, Neffys replied, her voice gaining a hard edge. A trick of the light. A piece of crystal. We will not know until we see it. Staying here is stagnation. Stagnation is death in this hellhole. Hugo wanted to argue. He wanted to list the countless ways this could go horribly wrong. But he saw the resolve in her eyes, the same relentless drive that mirrored his own. She was right, in a cold, brutal way. They were on a clock, hunted by the sea and every abomination in this labyrinth. Playing it safe was just a slower form of suicide. He let out a long, frustrated breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. Fine, quote. Sonny looked between them, his expression a mixture of dread and resignation. Well, this is a terrible idea. Let's go be fools, then. Neffys gave a single, sharp nod. Let's go. As they descended back into the labyrinth to wake Cassie and prepare for the march, Hugo couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into the jaws of death. The silence of the ash sea threatened to swallow them whole. Next chapters are going to be peak. Trust me, I'm going to cook. Ashen Hell. Chapter 30. Ashen Hell. Hugo felt something change the moment they stepped from the labyrinth's edge onto the gray sand. It was a pressure, not on his body but on his mind. A faint, insistent whisper at the edge of his consciousness that couldn't quite form into a coherent thought. It was like a word stuck on the tip of his tongue but for his entire soul. He frowned, looking at Sonny. Hey, do you feel that? Something wrong? Sonny didn't look away from the barren landscape. You'll have to be more specific. I'm feeling about 7 different kinds of wrong right now. Like something's trying to get into your head but can't find the door, Hugo clarified, his voice low. That got a reaction. Cassie and Neffys both stiffened, but just as quickly, their expressions went blank, as if the thought had slipped from their grasp. Only Sonny managed to hold on to the feeling, his face grim. Yeah, I feel it. This place is bad. Neffys glanced at them, her usual mask of indifference still on her face, but Hugo sensed a strange emptiness behind her eyes which was unnatural for the changing star he knew. Stay alert, was all she said, her voice flat. They moved deeper into the ashen waste. The silence was absolute. No wind, no skittering of creatures, just the crunch of their feet on gray sand. Then, it was Sonny who called a halt, his shadow scouting ahead. Nothing is moving, just flat, dead land, he reported, his voice tight with unease. Cassie listened intently, then shook her head. No sounds, nothing at all. Neffys's gaze was fixed on the distant ashen barrow crowned by its monstrous black tree. Let's continue. She altered their course slightly toward a small, sand-covered knoll, which was the only feature on the barren plain. As they neared it, Sonny suddenly froze, his expression turning into a deep frown. Hide, he hissed, dismissing his echo and grabbing Cassie in an instant. He pulled them all down behind the knoll, pressing them against the gritty surface. Hugo crouched, his hand instinctively moving to activate his Omnitrix. What is it, Centurions? Sonny whispered, peeking through a gap. 2 of them are coming from the labyrinth. They're carrying something. Hugo risked a look, using his emerald spyglass. He saw 2 massive, scythe-armed creatures moving with an unnerving purposefulness across the sand. Clutched carefully in their bone scythes were crystals that pulsed with a brilliant, hypnotic light. Hugo immediately recognized that light. They were the transcendent soul shards from 2 weeks ago. They're heading for the barrow, Sonny murmured, his voice tense. If they stay on course, they won't see us. They held their breath as the Centurions passed. The carapace creatures moved with a strange, reverent gait, like pilgrims on a sacred prayer. When they reached the base of the ash hill, one of the creatures stopped, carefully placed the shining shard on the sand, and then did something that made Hugo's confusion skyrocket. Both of the harrowing abominations knelt. The 8-legged horrors bowed their torsos, placing their scythes flat on the ground in a posture of absolute submission. "What's it doing?" Cassie whispered, sensing the shift in tension. "Wait," Sunny said, his eyes wide as he stared at the top of the barrow. A glimmer of light appeared from beneath the tree, growing brighter. A shape descended. This time, Hugo's breath caught in his throat as he took in the view of the creature. It was a carapace creature, but unlike any they had seen before. It was a behemoth, a walking fortress of polished, spiked metal that reflected the gray sky. 4 arms, 2 with pincers, 2 with scythes larger than the centurion's, moved with a dreadful, elegant power. Its face was a horrifying mockery of a human's, crowned with sharp horns. An aura of pure, ancient malice radiated from it, a pressure that made the air feel thick. "A demon," Nephis breathed, her voice barely audible. "Or worse." The metal demon ignored the kneeling centurions, picked up the transcendent shard and turned back toward the tree. Sunny's face was pale. "My shadow is following it." They waited in tense silence as Sunny tailed the creature. After a minute or so, Sunny let out a shaky breath. It's just eating a piece of fruit from the tree." It dropped the shard like it was nothing. The absurdity of it was almost as frightening as the creature itself. The centurions finally rose and retreated back toward the labyrinth. Once the creatures were gone, the cohort slowly stood up. "We need to go back now," Sunny said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Back at the Bone Ridge camp, the fire did little to chase the chill from Hugo's bones. Sunny finished recounting what he'd seen: the kneeling centurions, the metal demon, and the discarded transcendent shard. Hugo and Nephis both frowned in unison as Sunny recounted the things he saw in detail, clearly not excited by the implications. "What's more, its carapace is not made of chitin. Instead, it looks like some strange metal alloy. I don't think we'll be able to cut through it. I also didn't notice any gaps in that monstrosity's armor, not even around the joints." Cassie gulped, turning her head to her friend. Changing Star, however, remained silent. Sunny sighed. "In addition, that thing has 4 arms instead of the usual 2, a pair with pincers and a pair with scythes. They're even bigger than the centurion's. Its carapace is littered with spikes, and it has long horns on its head. It also looks, more human-like. It almost has a face, albeit an extremely ugly one. And its eyes, well, I think that it is more sentient than anything we had faced before." Hugo sighed, flipping a piece of meat as he said, "It's definitely an awakened demon." Sunny and Nephis nodded, clearly having similar thought processes. "Or maybe a devil. In any case, I think we should avoid that scary bastard at all cost." Changing Star stared at him, tilting her head a little. For a minute or so, there was only silence. Sunny gritted his teeth, then sighed, then blinked a couple of times. Finally, he gave her a doomed, crooked smile. "Let me guess, you want to kill it?" Nephis blinked slightly, looking at the shadowy sleeper before speaking in a calm tone. "Yes." Sunny was on the verge of ripping his eyeballs out from the sheer audacity of this respectable young lady. Before he could voice his thoughts, Hugo interrupted. "I think we can kill it." Sunny looked at Hugo with a shocked expression as if he had just been betrayed. "You're crazy too. Oh gods, why did I have to end up with you two of all people?" He ruffled his hair, clearly annoyed. Cassie chuckled slightly despite the grimness of the situation. Looking at the strange scene in front of him, Hugo coughed to get everyone's attention before continuing. "I actually have a way to kill the big bastard. I have an ascended memory. Well, not really, but I have a certain memory that can elevate the rank of my trident to the ascended rank. Which should be more than enough to hurt the big bastard." Nephis seemed deep in thought for a moment before asking in a nonchalant voice, "A charm memory?" Hugo shook his head. "It's a utility type," he said, summoning the small ruby-red polymorphic crystal. Deciding to reveal that to the trio was a bit difficult, but he didn't want to lie to his friends, so he simply decided to say it. "It's not like I'm revealing my aspect or anything," he thought before summoning his trident and showcasing the process of the upgrade enchantment. They watched in awe, well, aside from Cassie, who couldn't really see, as the crystal entered the trident, immediately enhancing its effects. "But that's not the only thing we can do to guarantee a clean kill," Hugo added, making the trio look at him in bewilderment. "Remember who made your charms. If I could make charms capable of granting positive effects, then it'd only be natural I'd be able to do the opposite," Hugo said with a sly smile on his face. Sunny's eyes widened as he understood the meaning behind his words. A weakening charm. Hugo nodded. Making one strong enough to weaken a demon or a devil would be hard but not impossible. Sure, it'll still be able to kill us in one hit, but at least it'll be slower at doing it. This time, it was Cassie who spoke, her curiosity piqued. Sorry if I sound slow, but how exactly would the charm work? Do you just throw it at the nightmare creature? Hugo looked at her confidently. Don't worry about that, I have an idea, he said, then turned his head towards Sunny. And I also happen to have someone who'd help me pull it off. Sunny gulped, not liking the look Hugo was giving him, but strangely enough, he did not object to his statement, simply accepting his fate with grim anticipation. Later that day Hugo spent the entire evening crafting strange sharp daggers from the carapaces they gathered on their journey. It was a much easier process than using his pyronite transformation minor stone manipulation, and this time around Sunny and Neffis could help him by sharpening the carapace with their swords. Eventually they ended up with a very large and sharp piece of carapace, its size almost Sunny's entire arm, which was quite funny. After that was finished there was the process of inscribing the runes, which was particularly difficult due to the fact that unlike with regular stone, the carapace of the dead scavengers were of the awakened rank in terms of durability, and so they had to resort to another way of inscribing the runes. Hugo sighed looking at the pale boy beside him. Hey Sunny. No, Hugo raised an eyebrow, I didn't even ask you anything yet. Sunny scoffed. Every time you start a sentence with, hey Sunny, you either ask me to do something crazy or kill you. Sometimes even both. Hugo rolled his eyes dramatically. Well, don't worry, I won't ask you to kill me this time, nor I'm going to ask you to do something too crazy. Really? Sunny asked, clearly unconvinced. Hugo smiled hesitantly. Sure. I mean, you'd only have to stab me. The process of inscribing the runes Hugo settled on was through using blood. Hugo blood, to be precise, considering he couldn't ask the others to do it. Although there was a certain benefit to it. Whenever he injured himself, Neffis could use her healing on him, essential, restoring him to his regular state in instant. So with that, he made Sunny cut him slightly, gathered the blood in a bowl of chitin, and then turned into a galvan, inscribing the following runes into the oversized dagger. Weakening. Poison. The two runes were similar to each other, both containing runic syllables of the same proportions, so the process of making the runes was far easier. There was also the fact that imbuing his will into the enchantment was a more successful endeavor this time around, considering Hugo focused on killing and harming rather than the concepts he prioritized when making the charms for the trio. Lastly, due to Hugo's only enchanting one item, he could saturate it with a large amount of soul essence, making both enchantments as powerful as they could possibly be for his current mastery over runic sorcery. Not to mention it'll last twice as long. By the times Hugo finished the entire thing, it was already early in the morning, and so Hugo told Sunny and Neffis that he'd be taking a small nap. The next day, the air in the camp was thick with a strange mix of dread and determination. Cassie had gotten a new vision which had given them a crucial piece of the puzzle, a hidden weakness on the demon's chest. Now, they just had to live long enough to exploit it. Sunny laid out his plan with the air of a man who knew it was insane. So, we need to get close without it trying to kill us on sight. To do that we'll need a disguise. Hugo raised an eyebrow. A disguise? To fool a 7-meter tall metal demon? You want us to, what, wear a hat? Not us, Sunny said, his eyes glinting. You. Hugo simply stared at him, confused even more. Elaborate. The centurions bring it offerings, right? They also kneel to it like it's their king, so it doesn't attack them on sight, Sunny said, pacing slowly to Hugo. So, we bring it an offering. A big one. You, transformed into 4-armed. Tetraman, Hugo corrected flatly. 4 arms is a stupid name. We'll wear the carapace of that centurion we killed. You'll be our Trojan horse. Well, Trojan thing. You'll carry the offering, that's us, hidden, right to its feet. Hugo processed this. The plan was reckless, borderline suicidal, and relied on the demon being both arrogant and gullible. You realize that if it sees through this, I'm the first one it turns into scrap metal. That's why we have the weakening charm, Neffis stated, as if that solved everything. And what if it just decides it doesn't like the look of me? A carapace centurion is one thing. A 4-armed, red-skinned thing in a carapace shell is another. Sunny looked at him, thinking about something. Well, can you transform into a carapace centurion? Hugo scoffed. It's not a matter of if I can, Sunny, he said, looking at his Omnitrix before adding, in theory I could do that, but that would limit me in the future. Quote. Hugo said, remembering that he only had 5 remaining imprint slots. Sunny, hearing Hugo reasoning, did not push forward, although he was a bit disappointing. Then this is the only plan we have, Neffy said, her tone final. Hugo looked at the empty centurion carapace they had dragged back to camp. It was a shell of black and crimson chitin, huge and menacing. The idea of cramming his Tetraman form into it was ludicrous, to say the least. All right, fine, I'll do the stupid disguise, he said, the words tasting like ash. If things go south, I'll carry you 3 and jump away, or at least try to. Sunny gave a grim nod. Understood. We'll be right under you. He stopped for a moment before adding, not in a. We get it, Hugo said, sighing at the absurdity of the situation while Neffys looked between them in confusion. From inside the stifling makeshift shell of a carapace centurion, Hugo felt like a complete idiot. The chitin armor was heavy, awkward, and reeked with a terrible smell. He was crammed into the thing in his Tetraman form, making it impossible to get any semblance of comfortability, while Sunny's shadow, the real mastermind of this absurdity, guided his movements from below, making him float across the sand to mimic the creature's gait. This is the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life, Hugo thought, the Omnitrix on his chest glowing slightly in his chest. The paragon of purity, carrier of thousands of DNA samples from extinct Nobel creatures and possibly the only wielder of a divine aspect in history, was currently playing dress up as a deadbuggy. Then one of the giant fake scythes strapped to his back came loose and thudded into the sand. Sunny's shadow, which was guiding him, made a gesture that could be summed up as, leave it. Hugo resisted the urge to tear the entire ridiculous costume off and just charge the hill to fight the demon. But alas, they had a plan. A stupid, fragile plan, but a plan nonetheless. They reached the base of the ashen barrow. Following Sunny's direction, Hugo, still disguised, kneeled slightly, imitating the centurions. Now we wait, he thought, grimly regretting the moment he agreed to Sunny's plan. He didn't have to wait long, as the ground slightly trembled. Peering through a narrow gap in the carapace, Hugo saw the carapace demon descend. The polished metal of its body reflected the dying sun, and its 4 arms flexed with latent, terrifying power. It stopped, observing the strange, motionless centurion, with those burning scarlet eyes. Here we go. The moment of truth. That moment of truth lasted only 1 second. With no hesitation, the demon lunged forward, its harrowing scythe flashed out with impossible speed. Now, Sunny yelled from a large distance. Hugo was already moving. With a surge of strength, the carapace shell shattered around him as the full, muscular bulk of his Tetraman form surged free. 4 powerful arms caught the descending scythe mid-swing, muscles straining against the overwhelming force. The impact sent shockwaves through his body, but he held. He didn't even hesitate, Hugo roared, shoving the scythe away and leaping a few feet away. From the remnants of the disguise, Sunny's scavenger echo scrambled out, darting forward to harry the demon's legs. The massive creature, momentarily surprised by Hugo's appearance, swatted at the nuisance with a pincer. The echo was sent flying, but rolled and regained its footing, its carapace cracked but intact. At that moment, Hugo leapt upward, using his trident to impale the demon pincer. The trident went through the thick carapace, then right at that moment, one of Hugo's arms flew it, slamming the enchanted dagger inside the abomination. Instantly Hugo poured essence into it, activating it before jumping away from the carapace demon. The creature let out a terrible scream as it launched a counter-attack. Hugo snarled, ducking under a swing from the other side. He couldn't block it head-on, else he'd be cut in half. So he had to be agile, which is why he picked the Tetraman form rather than Velogix. Hurry up, Hugo said to no one as he avoided the creature attacks. He saw Neffys, a blur of white, already halfway up the massive tree, with Cassie clinging to her back. Sunny was near her, sprinting across the ashen sand toward the base. The plan was to send Hugo and Sunny Scavenger to distract the abominations while the trio rushes towards the tree base. Hugo was picked because he was the only one capable of matching an awakened demon or escaping from it. But he was starting to doubt that fact, as the demon's attention was fully on him now. It saw him not as a curious centurion, but as a genuine threat. 4 arms versus 4 arms. Its metallic face seemed to twist into something resembling a snarl as it noticed that fact. It was fast, horrifyingly fast. Hugo poured every ounce of soul essence into his body to avoid the attack, the world narrowing to the dance of avoiding those razor-sharp scythes and crushing pincers. He was buying the cohort seconds, but each one feeling like an eternity. The echo charged again, latching onto one of the demon's back legs with its pincers. The giant creature stumbled, just for a moment, but it was the opening Hugo needed. Hugo used one of the abomination pincers to propel himself forward, then with two of his arms, he punched the horrible creature right in the face. Hugo punch, augmented by soul essence, was enough to send the creature flying slightly. Using that moment, Hugo grabbed his trident and activated the vortex enchantment, the terrible vortex of air forming around the creature, causing it to face the mighty assaults of the air. Hugo didn't attack after that, instead he retreated, using his incredible biology to leap upward from the creature. The plan, surprisingly enough, had gone perfectly for now. The creature was injured, weakened and dealing with a mini vortex. The reason Hugo didn't try to finish him off himself was because of his timer and the fact that the second part of the plan hadn't happened yet. Sunny's POV. Sunny saw it all from the base of the giant tree. He saw Hugo, now free of the shattered Centurion disguise, use the distraction to lunge at the demon, using trident to pierce a hole in the abomination weak spot before driving the weakening charm deep into the wound. The Paragon of Purity continued his assault, through Sunny's echo serving as a distraction. He saw Hugo jab the abomination with two mighty arms before using the vortex enchantment to summon a harrowing miniature storm. The fact that Hugo, a sleeper, used an enchantment that requires essence did not escape him, but he had more important stuff to do for now. A furious, metallic roar shook the ashen barrow. The demon swiped a scythe, but Hugo was already moving, his four-armed form granting him incredible agility as he began running away. As the vortex dissipated, the demon rushed at Sunny Echo, intending to destroy it, but luckily he managed to unsummon the scavenger right before that happened. Sunny, the package, Hugo yelled, sprinting and leaping toward the tree. Sunny didn't hesitate. He grabbed the seaweed rucksack Neffys had left and tossed it to the sprinting Tetraman. Hugo caught it without breaking stride. Climb, Sunny shouted up to Neffys, who was already pulling a wide-eyed Cassie onto the lowest branch. The demon, enraged by the stinging wound, gave chase. But its movements were already slower, more sluggish. The charm was doing its job well, not to mention the creature was extremely wounded. Hugo reached the tree. Instead of climbing, he turned, hefted the rucksack, and with all the strength in his forearms, hurled it directly at the demon's face. The sack burst open midair, releasing a cloud of the corrosive centipede oil they had harvested. The black liquid splattered across the demon's polished metal chest and helmet-like head. It sizzled, eating into the metal, though not deeply. The real effect was the blinding rage it incited. The demon shrieked, clawing at its face. That was their cue. Go, go, go. Hugo shoved Sunny toward the trunk where Neffys had dropped the golden rope. Sunny scrambled up. He glanced back to see Hugo take a mighty leap, his lower two hands catching a thick root, his upper two pulling his massive form up onto a different, lower branch than the one Neffys and Cassie were on. He was a clear, obvious target. The demon, wiping the oil from its eyes, focused its burning scarlet gaze on Hugo. It lunged, but its movements were heavy and labored. A scythe bit into the trunk where Hugo had been a second before, but the Tetraman was already swinging to a higher branch, putting the massive tree between himself and the monster. Hugo's POV. This is working. It's actually working, Hugo thought, his heart's hammering against his chest. The demon was strong, but the weakening charm and the corrosive oil had dulled its edge. It was like fighting through mud, giving Hugo the chance to evade it. He made a show of scrambling higher, a bright red target. He needed to keep its attention and draw it away from the others. Over here, you overgrown shit, he roared, tearing off a chunk of bark and throwing it with incredible velocity. The demon took the bait, circling the trunk, its scythes carving deep gashes into the ancient wood. Hugo danced back, using his forearms to swing and grab with an agility the heavy demon couldn't match. Below, he saw Sunny finally reach the safety of the high branch where Neffys and Cassie were hidden. Good. Then, right as they planned, a thunderous rumble echoed through the labyrinth. The dark sea was returning. The demon heard it too. It paused, its hateful gaze shifting from Hugo to the darkening horizon. With a final, frustrated roar that sounded like grinding steel, it began to retreat, lumbering back to its lair at the hill's summit. The weakening effect and the approaching sea had saved them. Hugo waited until the demon was gone, then let out a long, shaky breath. He looked over at the branch where the others were hiding and gave a slow deliberate thumbs up with one of his upper hands. They had survived the first encounter. Now came the hard part. Actually killing the thing. To be continued. Thanks for watching.